Chapter 789. Sophocles the Deceiver is the most unfathomable demon main god. He loves to tempt mortal warriors and powerful individuals to fall into depravity. He's an expert at arranging fates and tragedies. I've always felt that he's more suited to the title of King of Lies than I am. Back in Hades, devil main god TIAs had introduced me to Sophocles the Deceiver. Back then, little TIAs had told me about Sophocles the Deceiver's glorious achievements. Sophocles' most famous achievement is probably that he once created his own evil cult in the mortal plane and successfully made his incarnation a true god. This demon main god actually succeeded in becoming a true god, and he even allied with many true gods, causing all the order gods to lose all face. Sophocles and his believers are still the public enemies of all the true gods' churches. Perhaps this seemed like an unimportant background introduction, but if one were to look into it, it revealed a lot of things that were worth pondering. First of all, Sophocles had once had an incarnation act as a human hero. Sophocles gradually grew to a certain degree and established his own church, gradually obtaining divine power and belief, and finally ascending to become a true god. And then, not only did that incarnation of Sophocles successfully ascend to become a true god, he even received the recognition of other order gods and became a member of the order gods. Allying with other true gods meant that not only did Sophocles have true gods as allies, he had also completely integrated into the god system. It was highly likely that he had joined a certain god's faction and become an important part of that faction. This is basically the equivalent of becoming a mortal enemy's family member. The gods weren't idiots or imbeciles. Sophocles had been able to successfully scam them only because he had brought out the real thing, a real divine concept and divine concept. In that case, there would be far too many things to ponder and analyze. Harlois, what kind of church did Sophocles establish back in the day? What were his teachings and divine concepts? Evolution and species hierarchy. He advocated for the natural order between species and emphasized on self-evolution through hard work. The core of his teachings was an evolutionary tree that included all species. He believed that every species had their own position, but humans were at the top, while other species were just branches. Naturally, other species had strong opinions about this. However, the human kingdoms at the time greatly welcomed this belief, and it seemed like there were no problems. There were no problems? This was a big problem. This doctrine itself was self-contradictory. On one hand, it fixed the species' ranks, while on the other hand, it encouraged competition and evolution. The strong would be at the top, while the weak would fight and compete to become strong. The entire world was like a huge jungle. Wasn't that the essence of the chaos abyss? How preposterous and foolish was this? Changing the nature of the chaos abyss into another way of describing it, and then adding on the label of humanism, he became immensely popular in the Order faction, which was dominated by humans. In the end, he successfully became a true god of the Order faction. No wonder all the true gods' churches view Sophocles as their mortal enemy. As long as Sophocles is still alive, he'll be the symbol of how foolish all the Order true gods are. It was evident that Sophocles' dark history was hidden in the shadows. Most Order churches' popes only knew that Sophocles was Sophocles' mortal enemy, but didn't know why. However, the Devil Lord and Elven Empress Sophocles clearly remembered this. Talking about the past wasn't just for idle chatter. Past experiences were the journey of an individual's life. What they experienced and collected formed their present. Combining the information I received from Harlois and Sophocles' current appearance, I finally had an inference. However, this inference should have been ridiculous even in theory. Sophocles, you're not a demon at all, right? That's right. I could clearly see that Sophocles' armor of light was nothing more than a disguise. No matter how ridiculous the Heletum generation was, it was impossible for a set of armor to be able to control the power of order. If Sophocles was truly a pure demon, then the holy light and power of order that he controlled would directly burn him to ashes, just like how my unfortunate experimental subject had been hypnotized into believing in the holy light. Demons were pure creatures of chaos. No matter how their minds and souls thought, the power of order, especially the power of holy light that represented purification, would always conflict with their physical bodies. And now, Sophocles was pretending to be using his armor's power to control and absorb holy light. However, his true body was actually simultaneously using the power of order and chaos. In that case, there was only one explanation. You, Sophocles the Deceiver, aren't even a demon at all. You're an order true god. Sophocles' voice wasn't loud at all. In fact, it could only be called a murmur. However, due to a mysterious resonance, the entire battlefield could hear his voice. Thunder boomed, bringing with it an inconceivable question. The entire battlefield paused for a moment. At the next moment, what reverberated in the world was the double echo of a holy voice and a furious roar. Yes, since order can be considered a form of chaos, then the law of the jungle and self-evolution represented by chaos is also a form of order. Haha, you're much smarter than those old fellows. Even now, they still believe that it was just a well-planned prank. They never expected that I'd already obtained something from that prank. Not only am I the ruler of the chaos abyss, I'm also an evolved god. Was this a double personality disorder? No, it was just that my incarnation and my true self had different ways of thinking. For some reason, I felt that this was quite familiar. Isn't this the relationship between Womians and your true self? It would seem that someone else has already become a god before you. But no matter how you look at it, it's the exact opposite of you. Harlow's reminder helped me come to a sudden realization. Both of us had created an incarnation with a portion of our soul shards, and then successfully ascended to godhood. However, looking at the current situation, it was completely different. I had needed a judge, which was why I had Womians become an independent individual who combined with the concept of law to become a merciless judge. In the end, Womians was completely cut off from me. Meanwhile, Sophocles had done everything he could to ascend to godhood. However, he still followed the most basic principle of the chaos abyss, to become even stronger. I could basically see what he had done now. His incarnation had used the power of faith to ascend to godhood, and then his connection with Sophocles was discovered. His believers were viewed as evil cultists and sealed away. The collapse of the power of faith should have caused this weak new god to fall into eternal slumber. However, Sophocles had devoured and recombined with his incarnation. Sophocles' main god, level chaos power, replaced the power of belief in order to support the god of evolution's growth. Meanwhile, Sophocles' main body was silently transforming into an order god. In the end, Sophocles successfully became an order god by borrowing someone else's body. He transformed his incarnation into his main body, and his main body became his incarnation. In that case, the power that he normally shows is only half of his original power. If that was all there was to it, it wouldn't have given me a headache. The worst part was that Sophocles possessed the special abilities of both a god and a powerful demon. The god's special abilities were mainly reflected in their divine concepts and divine rights. They were incredibly skilled at creating their own combat environment and using dimensional laws to strengthen themselves and weaken their opponents. Meanwhile, a powerful demon's chaos domain would counteract or devour the opponent's dimensional laws, which would then force both sides to the same level for a melee fight. The powerful demon who had reached the apex of bloodthirsty evolution had a terrifying and gigantic body. The god of evolution together with a powerful demon who's skilled at evolution. This is truly cheating. Just thinking about it allowed me to discover countless possible combinations. For example, I could use the divine right of evolution to speed up my own evolution, allowing me to multiply my growth rate. I could also obtain many times the results and experience in certain areas. Still, this wasn't even the worst part. He's trying to simultaneously control both order and chaos. He's also trying to obtain the creator-goddess level of power. This isn't the first time he's been like this. Just 1 or 2 years have passed. Just what has he obtained over the past few years? Just what other aces does he have up his sleeves? I was already wondering if I had been too unlucky today. If things were really as I expected, then Sophocles wouldn't be the weakest main god at all. Not only would he be the strongest, he would be overwhelmingly stronger. The slyest main god had suddenly transformed into the strongest main god. Although this was unexpected, it was still reasonable. However, it was already too late to change Sophocles now. I could only grit my teeth and endure. I kept feeling like something was wrong. Of the three chaos main gods, I had originally thought that Donades would be the leader and the core. However, this was obviously not the case. It was definitely impossible for Donades to join the battle at a time like this. Just what was Sophocles thinking? At the same time, the cloud tower descended from the sky and attracted the attention of the entire battlefield. The next instant, Sophocles began to move. Chapter 790. The cloud tower tore through the dark clouds and brought the warriors on the battlefield more than just the much-needed sunlight. This was a city that had been managed by mages for several millennia. This city was definitely not just a symbolic existence. When all the mage towers were lit up, and when blue magical runes illuminated the entire sky, the world finally understood why attacking the mage country was viewed as such a fool's errand. Numerous magical sparks were ignited. Countless meteors streaked across the sky as the spell models took shape. Attack spells, meteors, blizzards, chain lightning, and so on descended like raindrops. Over 1,000 spells were cast, but there was no confusion at all as they all locked onto their targets. Meanwhile, the human allies were also flashing with magical radiance. Magical armor, weapon enchantments, resistance to chaos abyss energy, strength buffs, and agility buffs were more than enough to transform a kitten into a tiger, or a coward into a hero. The wise mages made their grand entrance for the first time. However, they seemed like upstarts who didn't have any foundational knowledge. They didn't hesitate to use their own magical power and cast all known and unknown spells. However, this was only the beginning. It was also the prelude to clearing the battlefield and creating a safe distance between them. Deafening incantations, ancient forest tunes, and curses filled with strange syllables rang out. At the same time, several forbidden spell level mana sources were activated. The forbidden spell level Elemental Tide directly created a new area of dead magic. Surprisingly, but within reason, the mages chose to transform into elemental cannons the moment they appeared. They unhesitatingly prepared forbidden spell attacks in order to force the enemy into a decisive battle. The devils wouldn't just sit there and wait for their deaths. The undead regrouped under the undead lord's command, while the demons viciously roared in search of new prey. Countless magical creatures finally gathered into a black tide. The mages had to destroy their enemies before the large-scale forbidden spells were cast. As such, they had to attack a city, a floating mage city that had countless archmages and mage towers. Countless sparks were ignited in the tide. Countless corpses had been used to decorate the path of their charge. The archmages used their actions to explain what it meant to be simple and direct. Violent and direct combat methods obtained a tremendous strategic advantage. All the cannons, mage towers, and archmages no longer needed to search for targets on the battlefield. The targets would voluntarily deliver themselves to them. Under the command of the archmages wouldn't dare to retreat even if they died. Perhaps the mages had borrowed Roland's strategy for dealing with the demon wave back in the Elven Kingdom. Or perhaps it was because the Cloud Tower already had such a strategy in reserve. The mages immediately seized the initiative on the battlefield. Mobile fortresses were far more difficult to defeat than airships. Such a strategy was even more shameless. The mages had already collected information on the battlefield. They had no intention of participating in the main god's battlefield. Instead, they began to clean up the low-intensity battlefield. The devils and undead had already suffered tremendous casualties after fighting for so long. The continuous, unexpected incidents caused the battlefield to become incredibly chaotic. The devils that didn't want to forcefully attack the mage city actually started deserting due to the forbidden spells. And when a deserter appeared, the undead lords and demon lords were no idiots. It was only natural that they would consider their own escape routes. When a large number of devils started deserting, the balance of the battle instantly tilted. After fighting for so long and paying such a high price, the human allied army seemed to finally see the light at the end of the tunnel after the cloud tower arrived. Now that hope had appeared, someone would attempt to instantly attack it. Sophocles the Deceiver transformed into a twisted shadow that glided towards the mage city at high speed. He unhesitatingly let go of his current opponent. Donades and Barbarat were both tied down. The only person who could change the situation would naturally be Sophocles the Deceiver. Sophocles the Deceiver. I heaved a sigh of relief when Sophocles changed targets. I indeed found it rather difficult to deal with him after he revealed his true combat strength. But if I allowed him to escape just like that, what face would I have left? The Northlands. I wasn't particularly skilled at flying, but I only needed a single thought to summon my magic sword, create an ice arena, and restrict my opponent's movements. Is this an avalanche? Should I say that I'm quite lucky? Countless snowflakes accumulated in midair before transforming into an ocean of ice and snow. The only thing that could be seen in the entire ice arena was the furiously descending waves of snow. Avalanches were one of the most severe ice and snow disasters. However, my magic sword, the Northlands, hadn't fully formed yet. I didn't expect it to be able to kill Sophocles, but the ice and snow here would be perfect for playing hide-and-seek. I unhesitatingly dove into the snow. Since I would be victorious as long as I could restrict Sophocles, I could use this battlefield to stall for time. Asterisk clang. Asterisk the next second, there was a thunderous sound that caused my entire body to go numb. The Northland's magic sword in my hand instantly transformed into dust. I looked around and saw that a large hole had been opened up in the ice arena. Snowflakes were flowing down from the hole. Sophocles had forcefully broken through the ice barrier. Is this the difference in absolute power? I really drew the worst number of cards this time. Although I had faintly guessed that my incomplete Northland's magic sword wouldn't be able to restrict Sophocles for long, I still felt rather helpless that Sophocles had forcefully broken through the ice barrier. The power of the natural laws had been shattered by brute force. However, that didn't mean that the natural laws themselves were useless. It was simply that brute force far surpassed the limits of the natural laws. Sophocles was already flying towards the Cloud City. Meanwhile, I was organizing my equipment. The Cloud Tower wouldn't be easy to deal with. If I flew slower, I would be able to catch up to the Cloud Tower's defensive nodes. Perhaps I would even be able to pincer attack them. Yep, it definitely wasn't, because I wanted to see what other trump cards the Mage Country had up their sleeves. Was I really that bad of a person to leave the Cloud Tower unguarded and allow my enemy to test my allies' trump cards? Not only you, even I want to know what other trump cards the Cloud Tower has up their sleeves. The silly cat's words echoed in my ears. However, this time, her familiar retort came from her main body. I looked up and saw that it was indeed her familiar appearance. However, she was currently covered in dust and blood. It would seem that flying here from the eastern battlefront hadn't been a very safe and pleasant experience. The eastern battlefront is doing quite well. The dragons are doing their best. That Devil Lord Sophocles has suffered quite a bit. Don't worry about them. Let's get through this first. I was greatly energized by her arrival. I now had yet another trump card that I could use. But before that, the Mage Country was forced to use a new trump card in front of us as we watched the menacing Sophocles. Chapter 791. Main god-level existences were at the peak of the entire world. They didn't have much in common with each other. Every existence's path of growth was unique. The term main god level was actually rather redundant. It was only a term that mortals used to describe these individuals at the peak of the world. They had already surpassed the limits of normal life evolution. They were capable of creating their own dimensions, hunting other species, and destroying or reviving countries with a single word. They were high up in the clouds, pushing and slowing down the world's changes from behind the scenes. In all the past holy wars, the main gods had always maintained an appropriate amount of restraint. They would first send their own species and subordinates into the battlefield, and would only participate indirectly when it was absolutely necessary. They would rarely personally participate. This wasn't because of a main god's pride, nor was it purely because they were restricted by the will of the Chaos Abyss. It was because at their level, the holy wars weren't that important anymore. They had already faintly escaped the cycle of the holy wars. Many main gods were existences that had experienced several or even several dozen holy wars. There were many existences that disobeyed the will of the Chaos Abyss and looked down on her orders. In all the past holy wars, apart from a small number of warmongers like Donati's, the top-level Chaos main gods would mostly restrain themselves when the middle-level and higher-level Chaos main gods would excitedly invade the mortal plane. This was something that the will of the Chaos Abyss, Cynthia, tacitly allowed and hoped for. Of course, she wouldn't say it out loud. In fact, she would even punish the Chaos main gods that ignored the summons for the holy war. But these Chaos main gods didn't really care. Demon noble titles and Chaos blessing were meaningless to them to begin with. Out of all the main god-level existences in the entire universe, only 20 or 30 of them were known to the world as the pinnacle of evolution. If every single one of them entered the holy war and 4 or 5 of them died each time, the holy war would be over in just a few battles. Evolution would be meaningless. Since the holy war wasn't that important to them, and they wouldn't risk their own lives, this was just like how poor people often dare to fight, seizing every opportunity to change their fate, while rich people were actually afraid of death. If you, an overgod, took action, then the other side should know how to send out an overgod to deal with you. However, it was very difficult to limit the intensity of a clash like this. Once they used their full strength, anyone could die. Actually, this was the same for the Order faction as well. Every time the Order faction was truly dragged into this, it would always be the main gods of the ruling species. The Order faction's main gods relied on the tremendous amount of faith provided by their species' strength to become powerful. However, this was also why they were restricted. It could be said that the Chaos faction's main gods would be replaced the fastest. When the species under their protection was challenged, that would be the same as the main god being challenged as well. The authority to rule over an entire dimension, along with the limitless amount of faith and resources, was something that even the main gods would be tempted by. It was also worth the risk of being destroyed. That was because when the god of holy light, Roland, had still been an ordinary person, he had only been a slightly stronger semi-god hero. At the very most, he had been on par with a low god. However, the current god of holy light was publicly acknowledged as the strongest main god. His power had even surpassed the combined power of multiple main gods. Everything that was happening before his eyes was too abnormal. Under normal circumstances, everything would have happened like this. The Chaos Abyss would invade. The demon lords who thirsted for blood and their minions would begin their first wave of looting. Now that the Chaos Abyss was facing both internal and external troubles, the other species would have their own plans and begin challenging the ruling species' authority, causing small-scale conflicts. The continuous battles would weaken the ruling species' combat strength and population. Various species would then try to become the new rulers of the Chaos Abyss. This would finally become a chaotic world where the final victor would be determined. During this process, the Chaos Abyss would be more like a natural disaster or a bandit passing by. The Chaos Abyss would willfully kill and rob, causing war and panic. The Chaos Abyss would be the mortal enemies of the ruling species and their gods. After the war, even if the new species that the Chaos Abyss supported became the ruler of the Chaos Abyss, the great majority of demons would still return to the Chaos Abyss. At most, in an era where the Chaos Abyss was in control, there would be even more travel to the lower planes, and the number of demon descendants on the surface would multiply by several times. 2,000 years later, the Order gods of the heavens would beat their war drums once more, and a new cycle would begin. What could the world possibly obtain during this process? Was the entire world really progressing? I felt that the answer was yes. Denying the progress and growth of war would be the greatest form of disrespect to the victims of war. The existential crisis brought about by war would forever be the greatest motivation for technological and civilization innovation. Every time a war broke out, more inventions and sparks of wisdom would appear. Some would even be several hundred years ahead of time. I wouldn't deny the progress brought about by war. That was because war would affect the innocent. They would need to think of every possible way to make breakthroughs in order to survive. They would use technology that would normally be used to create weapons of mass destruction. Even mathematicians would become code-cracking experts, and physicists would become bomb experts. I'm still against war, because those astonishing technological innovations can still be slowly invented in an era of peace, using a more peaceful and economical method to change the world. Those who believe that war can advance history and civilization are the ones who have a one-sided view of things. Are you really that opposed to Cynthia and her jungle evolution theory? Only war and killing each other will be able to produce evolution? I've never seen such an idiotic topic before. That's right. I've always felt that Cynthia is an idiot who hasn't graduated from high school due to her Chernibus syndrome. Actually, I even added in my mind, system, you're the same as well. You're just in a slightly different direction. Cough, I went off topic. Let's get back to the main topic. My impression of the Chaos main gods and demon armies was that in most situations, a destructive weapon capable of destroying the ruling species. This was an ultimate test that the ruling species had to face. This time, from the very start, the situation seemed off. Even without the will of the Chaos Abyss restraining them, the Chaos main gods were far too active. Sophocles obviously wasn't a warmonger, yet he had already started stirring up trouble. Not only had Sophocles entered the battlefield himself, he had even dragged Donades and Barbarat along with him. These two were the most enthusiastic participants in all previous holy wars. They didn't need any rewards. It was enough as long as they could kill, fight, and eat happily. But why was Sophocles himself participating so enthusiastically? Barbarat and Donades didn't need a reason to go to war, but Sophocles did. Sophocles was a smart individual, as well as an ambitious individual. The common characteristic of these two individuals was that Sophocles would only act for his own personal benefits and goals. Honor and reputation were meaningless to Sophocles. He had worked so hard to do all of this for a certain personal benefit. Just what was his personal goal? At this moment, I recalled how Sophocles had previously invited me to surround and attack Cavendish. Suddenly, a strange thought flashed through my mind. Although this sounded ridiculous, if I combined it with Sophocles' divine concept, perhaps everything could be explained. By the way, is it really okay for you to just watch from the sidelines? You stayed at the Cloud Tower for so long already. You should have some feelings for it. Harlois, didn't the Cloud Tower also raise you? You were even one of its teachers in the past. If you want to go help, go help. We flew at a leisurely pace, chatting as we observed the entire battlefield. We had no intentions of helping Sophocles when he attempted to attack the Cloud Tower. We had lived at the Cloud Tower for quite some time, so we weren't worried that it would be so easily destroyed. Right now, we were more interested in seeing just how many trump cards Sophocles and Sophocles could force out. At the top of the Cloud Tower, a golden rune in the shape of a mage's hat lit up, seeming to be summoning something. Sophocles had given up on being my opponent here, which was actually a good thing for our battle situation. Barbarat's battle is so ugly. I don't want to participate in the mud wrestling. I'd rather go help the Titan Giants. It was a 3v3 battle. Whenever someone left first, the remaining two would naturally be the unlucky ones. I would truly be an idiot if I didn't take this opportunity to gain an advantage in a 2v1 battle. As for why I chose the Titan Giants battle instead of Heimer's, it definitely wasn't because the Titan Giants had a great advantage, nor was it because I wanted to take revenge on Donades. Cough, cough. Even if it was because of personal grudges, choosing to defeat the weaklings to create a snowball advantage on a battlefield was definitely the wisest choice. Just as I was about to head down and gang up on Donades, Sophocles' battle caused me to change my mind. The Cloud Tower's magical summoning had ended. An old acquaintance of mine had appeared in Midair. Back when I was in the Hades, we had even had tea and chatted together as temporary enemies. This white-robed old man had a long white beard that reached the ground. Even though he was using a walking stick, he didn't seem old at all. As he stood there, he instantly controlled the mana waves around him. The elemental tide formed a natural barrier around him. This was Calamanda's, the god of wisdom, a main god, and Harlow's former protector. At this moment, the mages also revealed an incredibly powerful trump card. Calamanda's was one of the few gods that mages worshipped. However, nobody knew that he had long since allied himself with the mages. The mage country also revealed their main god-level combat strength, which was more than enough to prove their sincerity in participating in this battle for survival. From a certain standpoint, Calamanda's appearance on the battlefield at this time also represented that he had broken off relations with the Holy Light faction. As long as we did our best, we would gain yet another reliable combat strength. This was also why I immediately changed sides. Calamanda's wasn't a main god who was skilled at combat. If Calamanda's treated the current Sophocles like his old self, he would definitely suffer greatly. But looking at things from a different perspective, there wasn't much difference. It would still be a 2v1 battle. Chapter 792. Calamanda's, the god of wisdom, had many divine concepts. Just like the other main gods, he was also a top-level god king in his own god faction. This god faction was probably the most low-key god faction in the world. Most gods in this god faction were the guardians of books, knowledge, and scholars. Calamanda's was viewed as the most neutral god faction that focused on promoting and preserving civilization and culture. But when the entire world descended into chaos, when the flames of war burned the entire world, the scholars would no longer be able to hide in their ivory towers. Since they lived in this world, they would have to make a decision in the end. At the very least, they would have to choose the side that was most likely to win. At the very least, they would have to have some allies that could help each other. As Calamanda's was a god who didn't believe in any religion, he actually looked down on the fanatical believers of the true gods. Mages who pursued the truth were the true gods' natural allies. They had signed an alliance several hundred years ago. Calamanda's had agreed that they would stand together in times of need. And now is obviously such a time of need. Calamanda's was still thinking about what kind of situation would make the mages activate this final alliance when he stepped out of the magic array. He wasn't afraid that there would be any traps here, because he had long since reached the peak of the world. But now, he was no longer as confident as before. This was a battlefield devoid of light. The only thing that filled the entire battlefield was the clash of main god-level powers. The undefeatable Chaos War God was being beaten up by a tall giant. The Chaos Demon Lord and Devil Lord were currently tearing at each other. The gods' battle caused the space here to tremble. Such a battlefield instantly made Calamanda's raise his vigilance. He also noticed his opponent approaching him. Calamanda's was quite familiar with the powerful existence approaching him. Sophocles was an old opponent of his. Both of them were main god-level existences. It was only natural that they had fought against each other in the long years of history. It would be far too difficult for old existences like Calamanda's to improve at a foundational level. Calamanda's waved his staff in a practiced manner, instantly creating a blue magical shield in midair. This shield was as large and sturdy as a city wall. When he waved his staff a second time, several air knight squadrons of elemental spirits appeared in the sky. These knights were controlling over 1,000 high-level elemental creatures. In midair, layers of defenses that flickered with mysterious runes were activated. In a short instant, Calamanda's set up 17 layers of defenses with the power of the god equipment. Calamanda's then stood where he was and gathered his divine power to create a gigantic offensive magic array. He intended to give Sophocles a vicious blow and use reality to tell him that even an old dog like Sophocles still had some teeth, and that Calamanda's wasn't so senile that he couldn't even hold a magic staff. Oh no, Calamanda's response wasn't exactly correct. However, it seemed to me that Calamandas had obviously underestimated Sophocles. He was still judging Sophocles by his old standards. Right in front of me, Sophocles suddenly split into two. The angel of light transformed into a sharp arrow that pierced through the elemental knight's defenses, while the demon of darkness transformed into a hammer that shattered the mage's magic shield. The 17 layers of defense were instantly destroyed, layer by layer. In just an instant, Calamanda's defense, which he thought would be solid enough, was directly torn apart. Calamandas was still lowering his head and preparing a powerful offensive incantation. By the time that Calamandas noticed that the situation was bad, Light and Shadow's meteor had already landed in front of him. He didn't even have the time to react before the meteor pierced through his body, leaving behind a torn body and a pitiful scream that shook the entire battlefield. At that moment, Calamandas looked towards me with a gaze filled with disbelief and astonishment. In the end, this gaze transformed into hatred. Calamandas lost? He died? So quickly? I couldn't believe what had just happened. Calamandas had died in a single exchange. Even if he had underestimated Sophocles, Calamandas was still a main god. How could he have lost so quickly? The situation wasn't right. I had just fought against Sophocles. If Sophocles had the ability to instantly kill a main god, I would have been killed long ago. Calamanda's defense had been as weak as paper in front of Sophocles. This definitely wasn't normal. Since Calamandas dared to set up such a powerful defense and focus on preparing a powerful attack, he must have been absolutely confident. Even if Calamandas' information was wrong, he shouldn't have been defeated so easily. It was as if he directly opened an iron door with a key. Harlowe's words contained a faint hint of hatred, which surprised me. After she glanced at me, she sent me a message. As it turned out, as the inventor of elemental magic and the founder of magical civilization, the Gold Elves had received much help from Calamandas. Not only did the Gold Elves worship the Gold Elven gods, but they also worshipped the wisdom gods. As the Gold Elves researched the truth of magic, the magical Gold Elves and Calamandas formed a deep friendship. Since both Calamandas and Calamandas were undying existences, this friendship actually lasted until modern times. As expected of the god of wisdom, Calamandas was filled with friendliness towards all species that were searching for the truth. In the eyes of these species, Calamandas never blindly acted as a prophet. He was more like someone who was searching for the truth. He was a trustworthy ally and senior. Calamandas was inextricably connected to the Haletdom generation and had a 10,000-year friendship with the Gold Elf Empire. Now, he was also an ally of the Mage Country. During the Battle of the Hades, although Calamandas had been an invader, he had been able to chat and drink tea with us the entire time. One of the main reasons was that not only was he a remnant of the Haletdom generation, he was also Harlowe's protector and supporter, which was why Harlowe's hadn't been killed yet. And such an existence that was supposed to be indestructible was easily torn apart in front of us, directly torn into two halves. Those defenses were the result of the Gold Elf Empire and Calamanda's joint research. The mystical protection shield, the Harlan Elemental Knight Order's summoning, and the 17-leaf world tree's defensive formation are all forbidden magic spells from the Gold Elf Empire. Only the Gold Elves with the royal bloodline are allowed to use them. I finally understood what Calamanda's final grudge was about. Since it was the Gold Elf Empire's secret, he believed that Harlowe's was the one who leaked his information. And as far as I knew, although Harlowe's was quite shameless, had a bad mouth, was always acting like it's under a princess, and always looked down on my magic talent. Cough, cough, at the very least, she still had a sense of scale in her heart. She would treat those who were truly good to her sincerely. Abelard. I paused in surprise when Harlowe's said his name in a heavy tone. Who was Abelard? So, she added one more sentence. Dedina. Oh, so it's your mother? No, your father. Cough, cough, the weather today is quite nice. I turned around to see an incredibly grim expression as expected. It would seem that Abelard's betrayal had angered her quite a bit. It would be better for me to say less. But it was my turn to have a headache. Not only did I have to deal with Sophocles, but I also recalled how Dedina had given the information to Sophocles. In a way, This was proof that I had just come to a conclusion that would lead to the worst possible outcome. Sophocles is Cavendish's true ally. Chapter 793. The fact that Calamandas instantly collapsed the moment he appeared caused the entire battlefield to pause. That was because he was a main god. It was inconceivable that he would be killed so easily. The Cloud Tower's mages were probably the most panicked of all. They never expected that a powerful main god like Calamandas would be defeated so easily. Even though Calamandas wasn't known for his combat prowess, he was still far more famous than the weakest main god, Sophocles. Fine. With a low roar, all the magic energy that had been torn apart gathered together again and transformed into a physical substance. The magic energy intertwined into threads, which then wove into a net. Sophocles' magical web entangled him, which also stopped him from continuing to chase after Sophocles. That's right, continuing his pursuit. Even though Calamandas was ambushed and defeated, it would still be so easy for a main god like Calamandas to die. Berserk magic and divine power gathered together, forming the upper body of a white-haired old man. Although Calamandas was in quite a sorry state, and his lower body had completely vanished, at the very least he hadn't died on the spot. The magical net that Calamandas created with all his might had only managed to trap Sophocles for an instant. But that's enough. My dawn holy sword viciously sliced at Sophocles' body. The darkness main god's defenses vanished under the illumination of holy light. Right after that, I exploded with my favorite punch. Meanwhile, behind me, Harlois was hurriedly trying to heal Calamandas. However, it was likely that neither of us had high hopes for her to succeed. "Roland, are you really going to stop me?" Sophocles' voice was still a mix of voices, but there wasn't even a single shred of emotion in his voice. The Sophocles before me was becoming more and more emotionless, and he seemed less and less like a demon. Stop him? Wasn't Sophocles' main goal to invade the mortal plane with his demon army? Why did it seem that killing Calamandas was his main goal instead? Something was wrong with the situation. Not only was Sophocles prepared, he was even hunting Calamandas down. What would he live for if he killed Calamandas? The divine concept of wisdom and knowledge? I kept feeling like something was wrong with the situation, but my hands didn't stop moving. I summoned my absolute ice armor, as well as my top-quality shield, Omdorokin's Wall of Size, which I hadn't used in a long time. He held a sword in one hand and a shield in the other, protecting most of his body behind the armor and shield. He leaned forward slightly and only locked onto his opponent through the gap between his helmet. He held the sword lightly in his hand and the shield firmly in his hand. He took a heavy step forward and was ready to react at any moment. This was the defensive posture that every human infantryman would use. Although this stance couldn't be called cool, Calamandas had been defeated in battle over the Calamandas. Calamandas had been defeated. I unhesitatingly decided to use the turtle shell tactic against Sophocles, who was in a bad situation. In the Cloud Tower, numerous mage towers were currently charging up. Compound mega attack spells were all locked onto the demons before me. Numerous black dots in the sky were getting closer and closer. These were all senior archmages that I had to face directly. Although I didn't have much hope that Harlois' healing would be effective, Calamandas should be able to recover some combat strength if he was given some time. Time was on my side, so I naturally chose to stall for time. The ultimate glory of killing a main god wasn't something that I considered from the very start. At this moment, a melodious holy song spread throughout the entire battlefield. Darkness was dispelled by light, and everyone instinctively looked up at the sky. However, they were unable to look directly at the blinding light. The god of holy light? What's he doing here? This situation was already chaotic enough. Another main god? And the strongest main god at that? I looked up at the sky. Holy light was unable to block my vision. I heaved a faint sigh of relief when I saw the incarnation of holy light. Fortunately, it's only a clone, even though it's a main god level clone. I was even somewhat jealous. Calamandas truly had a lot of resources. He was casually wasting divine power. He had already lost several main god-level clones, yet he was casually sending out another one. Although I was slightly distracted, my gaze was still locked on his Sophocles. I could faintly hear what he was saying. He's finally here? The god of holy light was brought here by his Sophocles as well? Just what was Sophocles trying to do? Suddenly, Sophocles paused, and his blurry face regained its emotions. It was a rather familiar face, but it had an inexplicably gentle smile on it. He was sighing, as if he was an ordinary person who was troubled by trivial matters. Finally, he came to a sudden realization and revealed a smile of abandoning everything. Everything is for the purest form of evolution. Damn it, why did this slogan sound so familiar? You can't be playing the exact same trick, right? You're going to play the exact same trick after shouting the slogan. Asterisk boom. Asterisk a deafening explosion and a world-destroying flash simultaneously appeared in front of me. Sophocles, the powerful main god who had just revealed his true power, smiled as he completed the end of a villain. He shouted the word self-destruct. A main god's self-destruction? Right in front of me. At that moment, my brain reacted slower than my survival instincts. My instincts for danger caused chills to run down my spine. I immediately used the most effective method to save myself. At that moment, I only had the time to throw away my shield, turn around, and drag Harlois into that world. Then, I watched as the world around me turned white. This was no longer a simple attack of divine power. The combination of light and darkness created the most powerful divine power bomb in all of history. However, unlike in the past, this explosion was far too close and far too powerful. Even though I was in my personal bug-like world, the external attacks were still beginning to shatter the dimensional barriers. The dark gray, personal bug-like world began to fade as the connection to the Hades was forcefully shattered by the powerful divine power. The entire world in front of me was constantly shaking as it was peeled off piece by piece and finally returned to nothingness. Yongyes City. I acted faster than my will. My mage city directly connected me and Harlois, and all of the floating city's mana was used to maintain the mage tower's shields. Even so, the divine power that seeped into my mage tower was still destroying my pitiful foundation. Gales of divine power and dimensional cracks tore at my personal world. My magical shield was like a balloon that had been squeezed to its limit and was making a frightening sound. The entire floating city was shaking furiously, just like an arc of despair at the end of the world. The only thing that was trustworthy was that I hadn't tried to save any materials when creating my mage tower. No matter how fierce the storm in the outside world was, my sturdy magical shield managed to survive. However, we were like fish left on the shore after the tide had ebbed, and were directly tossed into the mortal plane. By the time everything barely returned to normal, we were in a completely different new world. We were now in an indescribably abnormal world. Multiple main gods had died, causing the dimensional laws of this entire world to become chaotic. Countless dimensional cracks had appeared, and the original blue sky and white clouds had vanished without a trace. The sky was now a chaotic universe filled with stars, and Sophocles had taken away more than one or two main gods. However, I was currently attracted by a figure who had just arrived on the battlefield. If my inference was correct, he was the true mastermind behind this battle and Sophocles' abnormal actions. Cavendish, just what did you do? Chapter 794. Divine power self-destruction would always be a god's final move. They would transform their eternal life and limitless divine power into sparks that would drag their enemy down to hell with them in their despair. Weak gods would be able to kill powerful gods with this move, and the gods' world would be relatively stable. I didn't need to elaborate on how important this move was. But was the current situation really that bad for Sophocles? The answer was obviously no. The Chaos faction's armies were still endlessly pouring in through the dimensional door. The main gods weren't at an overwhelming disadvantage yet. Everything wasn't over yet. Even if the Chaos faction truly lost, wouldn't it be enough for Sophocles to just leave? Would he be foolish enough to die for the Chaos faction? Just how much had Sophocles invested in this battle? Why was he sacrificing everything? Why did he have to drag the other main gods to their deaths? I couldn't understand, but I knew that the existence before me would definitely be able to explain it to me. Cavendish, just what are you all doing? For me, the unknown was always depressing. It was quite uncomfortable to be led around by the nose. But I believed that the person before me would be able to give me an answer. The current battlefield was no different from the ancient battlefields of the mythological generation. There was no obvious difference between heaven and earth. The blue sky and white clouds had been replaced by the starry sky, and the foundational dimensional laws of the world had been shattered. I had never seen such a terrifying scene before. Countless dimensional tiers were being torn open, and my vision, sound, and senses were all being distorted. My sense of time and space was obviously out of balance. Even though I was only a few meters away, I felt like I was thousands of kilometers away. No, I was indeed thousands of kilometers away. You wouldn't know where your next step would land when you took the first step. When the foundational dimensional laws were broken, everything lost stability. Every step you took represented countless possibilities. In such a battlefield, gold-rank individuals didn't even have the right to be cannon fodder. Answer me, Cavendish. Amidst all the chaos, the most eye-catching thing was probably the giant god who stood tall between heaven and earth. Hey, is this me? As expected of Cockroach. Even that didn't kill you. It was a familiar figure, a familiar appearance, and a familiar frivolous temperament. I had never thought that such a face could make me so angry. I took a step forward, but I suddenly appeared more than 300 meters behind him. It seemed that before the dimensional laws here stabilized, I would be unable to touch him. As far as the eye could see, the battlefield was a mess, but it wasn't that there were no survivors. The cloud tower landed on the ground with thick smoke rising from it. It seemed that it was already half destroyed. It wasn't that it had suffered heavy damage. The fact that the cloud tower hadn't been reduced to rubble and dust from the explosion meant that they had survived. At this moment, the strongest main god present, Titan, wasn't at the center of the explosion to begin with. There was enough distance between them to give him time to react. He was now half kneeling on the ground, glaring viciously at Cavendish. As for his opponent, Donades, although he was also struggling at death's door, he did not die in the explosion. But the other pair of sovereigns didn't have an easy time. I recalled that at that moment, Sophocles had once again used his special ability to split himself into two. One of the two was a demon, which locked onto us, the god of holy light's incarnation, and the god of wisdom's incarnation. Sophocles used his elemental advantage to deal the greatest amount of damage. Sophocles' other half was the god of evolution's incarnation, but he charged towards Hymer and Barbarat's battle. Now, there was nothing but a pile of minced meat and the power of chaos. The priceless divinities, god equipment shards, the demon main god's heart, and so on had all been casually tossed aside like trash. I could sense Hymer's power, but I was unable to sense his existence. It seemed that he and Barbarat had already died. The god of wisdom, Calamandas, the main god, Devourer Barbarat, the god of despair, Hymer, and if you included the god of holy light's clone, Sophocles, and 4 other main god-level existences had perished in just a short instant. Every main god wasn't just an individual. The order gods were an amalgamation of dimensional laws. A god-king level order god would be at the top of any god faction, capable of changing the dimensional laws with a single word. They would be the controllers of certain dimensional laws. The chaos main gods were the product of the evolution of chaos. In the process of their growth, they had devoured countless souls. Every time a chaos main god fell, countless souls would return to the cycle of reincarnation. They could even affect the depth of the Styx. And now, in just a short instant, 6 main gods Sophocles counted as 2 main gods had simultaneously died. It was as if someone had forcefully dug out a huge chunk of the ocean. There was a huge hole in the ocean along with the main god's remnants, which made this area incredibly unstable. The current situation provided me with sufficient information. By now, I could faintly guess it's Sophocles and Cavendish's plan, but, bro, you've already guessed it. Why are you still asking? Wasting your breath isn't your style. The Abyss Prince hadn't come here just to observe the battle. Countless little demons flew out from behind him and landed with heavy obsidian stones. They seemed to be constructing something. I fell silent. While I had indeed guessed it, I hadn't expected it to be such a grand scale. It's to open the door? It's just to open that door? To my astonishment, Cavendish directly shook his head. No, there's actually no door at all. Back in the day, Sophocles and Sophocles went to extreme lengths. The entire universe is sealed off, just like a stone room without any doors or windows. In such a situation, even if you have a key, it's impossible to open the door without a lock or a door. So, you need to blow up a door, and the main gods are the necessary sacrifices? Although it was a question, I sounded certain. This was the only possibility that would be beneficial enough to make Sophocles pay such a high price. Carlo shrugged and smiled as he reached out with 3 fingers. 3 main gods is the minimum. However, Sophocles has completed his mission quite well. With a total of 6 main gods as sacrifices, this area has already been initialized. This place shall become the door to a new world. He didn't have any emotional fluctuations, as he was simply stating the facts. However, this abnormal calmness that was obviously not in line with Cavendish's personality helped me faintly understand his determination. An initialized world isn't something that can be analyzed in such a short amount of time. Don't waste your time. Relax, I'm not interested in those parasites. As I said this, I glanced at the cloud tower that was slowly rising into the sky. It would seem that he had seen through my plan of stalling for time so that the survivors could retreat. Parasites? Aren't they? Those parasites are clearly a part of humanity. They believe that they know all the mysteries of the world because they know a little bit of magic. It's only natural that they're superior to others and enjoy the sacrifices of ordinary people, but they've never treated themselves as part of humanity. They only enjoy benefits and never fulfill their obligations. If they aren't parasites, then what are they? That's exactly what you said back in the day. I instantly fell silent for a moment. From my perspective back in the day, the Mage Country was clearly the most powerful country in the world, yet never did anything to change the world. It would be quite normal for me to say something like that with my extreme attitude back then. But I still needed to be careful. It would be quite troublesome if news of this spread. Cough, we all heard you. I heard Harlow's secret message in my ear. The next instant, the light of teleportation lit up on my body. It would seem that the cloud tower had completed its spatial analysis. As I looked at Cavendish, I finally asked him what he wanted to know. Why did you tell me all this? Why didn't you just kill me? Cavendish had a rather strange expression, as if it was strange for me to ask such a question. Why did I kill you? Just this sentence alone is enough for me to know that the old granny on your body hasn't told you anything yet. Go back and properly ask her about our undying nature. I didn't manage to hear Harlow's last sentence as I was dragged back to the cloud tower. The final scene that I saw out of the corner of my eye caused my scalp to go numb. The Ionia city that I had worked so hard to create had been mostly destroyed. The core sealed within had also been opened. The person who just crawled out of the core and was glaring at me seemed to be an old acquaintance of mine. Chapter 795. There's no victor on the eastern battlefront. The sun was bright and sunny tomorrow, but the cloud tower was filled with worry. The only piece of good news was that Devil-Mane God Sarnston had died. The dragons attacked us at all costs. Amelia, the mother of wood spirits, and Dunder, the king of the dwarf gods, personally helped out. They fought for 16 hours and finally succeeded in killing main god Sarwinston. The Hell Dragons displayed incredibly powerful combat strength in this battle. The legendary 9-headed Hell Dragon Evelyn. The fairy's news was always timely, especially since the eastern battlefront was facing such an unexpected event. We needed good news to boost morale even more. Sarwinston was probably the most unfortunate main god of all. He had transformed from a devil-mane god into a chaos lord, but he hadn't even had 2 good days before he was forcefully killed. Even if he had survived, Sophocles would have long since considered him a sacrifice. Sarwinston wouldn't have been able to survive this. In this battle, Sarwinston's death had become nothing more than a side character. The Hell Dragons of the Hades had displayed their abilities as legendary dragons and officially received the recognition of the surface dragons. The old Hell Dragon Sam, who had previously been a supreme, immemorial white dragon, had finally been able to vent his anger. Based on what I expected, the Hell Dragons would establish their own dragon cities in the mortal plane and establish stable communication channels with the other countries. This would fulfill their responsibilities as messengers of the Hades faction. As for Amelia and the dwarf gods, this counted as a further cooperation between the nature gods and the wood spirits. It was likely that Amelia would soon be given the astonishing title of Nature Main God. Successfully killing Devil Main God Sarwinston was probably the most astonishing combat achievement I had ever achieved in the entire Holy War. It also proved that I had made the correct strategic decision. Having Amelia, the nature gods, and the Hell Dragons hold the line on the western battlefront was indeed the best strategy. They managed to take down Sarwinston in a very short period of time. Are you certain that you didn't have any selfish intentions of having Amelia stay away from the battlefield? I'm not the god of fate. How could I possibly think that far ahead? Still, it's our greatest fortune that Amelia isn't on the eastern battlefront. I felt a lingering fear. Normally speaking, Amelia should have appeared on the eastern battlefront. However, just her status as a Chaos Girl would have made Sophocles unhesitatingly choose her as his top target. I had more or less figured out Sophocles' strange situation, but I still needed some time and evidence to verify it. It was now the second morning after this Sophocles explosion. The fairies' magazines and special reports in front of us all carefully avoided mentioning the battle on the eastern battlefront. They only mentioned that a gigantic explosion had occurred and that the specific details were still being investigated. They focus on the victory on the western battlefront. Devil Main God Sarwinston's death would have been an astonishing victory for the entire world several days ago. But now, we can only temporarily forget the pain of war. Haven't you finished analyzing the spatial nodes in that chaotic realm? Did the data for the next level come out? Are there no temperature, atmosphere, or physical constants? Is the rescue team back? Still nothing? Damn it, haven't those unlucky bastards come out from the teleportation room yet? We don't have any more time. This place isn't safe. We need to quickly relocate. The mages' courtyard were no longer as leisurely as before. The previously clean streets were now filled with rubble and trash. In such chaos, all rational mages were carefully conserving every bit of mana they could. There were busy people everywhere. In some ways, the mages' losses were greater than expected. As the mage country's national treasure, the Cloud Tower had lost 5 of its 7 main anti-gravity engines. The Cloud Tower barely managed to float in the air for 10 or so minutes before crashing into Barty's Hake Mountain range. 70% of the streets were damaged. Due to the collision, more than 3,000 residents were injured or killed. The amount of property damage was incalculable. The most critical part was the permanent damage done to the mage towers. Although the Cloud Tower had survived the explosion thanks to thousands of mage towers and tens of thousands of archmages working together to defend the Cloud Tower, it was likely that most of the defensive mage towers would need to be reconstructed. The Cloud Tower wouldn't have any combat strength for the time being. On the battlefield back then, all the magic puppets, war puppets, and summoned creatures that the spellcasters had thrown into the battlefield had been completely annihilated. This was an accumulation of decades, or even hundreds of meters. If converted into resources, it would definitely be an astronomical loss. The only thing worth celebrating was that the Cloud Tower had appeared on the battlefield. That's right, for the Mage Country, the Cloud Tower's appearance on the battlefield was actually a fortunate thing. That was because the Cloud Tower had avoided even greater losses, an irreparable tragedy. Mages would always leave spatial imprints in their mage towers. When necessary, as long as they weren't too far away from their mage towers, they could easily teleport themselves back to their mage towers. This was often a mage's final method of escape. The Cloud Tower recorded all registered mages' imprints in their mage towers. The instant that the explosion was about to occur, Archmage Leon and the others activated the final sequence and forcefully summoned all the mages from the mage country back to the battlefield. This prevented the most serious possibility, a large number of useless archmages dying. Of course, there were still losses. Teleportation consumed a tremendous amount of energy. Simultaneously summoning several thousand people would consume a tremendous amount of energy, which was another reason why the Cloud Tower had suffered such heavy losses. However, there was another unexpected event that no one had expected. Since the public teleportation rooms had limited space, the mages who had just been teleported here didn't even have time to react before someone stepped on their heads. Stampedes occurred in all the teleportation rooms. The archmages' backs were severely injured, and many were still moaning in pain in their beds. Even so, the teleportation room was still packed to the brim. The tower spirits responsible for teleportation had prepared a backup plan based on the situation and began directly teleporting the remaining people out. Were these unlucky fellows now? Whether or not they were still alive in this dimension would depend on us. We would have to wait until we had some free time to check the tower spirits' records. Even so, being able to survive that catastrophe still made people feel a lingering fear, but at the same time, there was also the joy of being reborn after the catastrophe. The mage country hadn't suffered the greatest losses. Sophocles' explosion had been even faster than a tsunami. All the Bardi Empire's ships that had been docked along the coastline had all been destroyed. There was no longer any need to search for survivors on the ground. That chaotic dimension was still a forbidden area for the living that couldn't be analyzed. The mages had sent out rescue teams to search the sea in hopes of finding more survivors. I had a long-distance magical communication with Halent. His expression was rather subtle. From a certain standpoint, he had suffered great losses in this battle. He could even be considered a loser. But looking at it from another angle, he had mysteriously obtained what he wanted. He had obtained both fame and benefits. What benefits did he obtain? Sophocles' final attack wouldn't distinguish between friend and foe. Not only did he wipe out everyone on the battlefield, he even transformed his attack into a super powerful shockwave and earthquake that bombarded the entire area with divine power. The first to be affected was Asalivis, which wasn't too far away from the battlefield, or perhaps I should call it the ruins of Asalivis. Almost half of Asalivis City was transformed into a chaotic dimension. The shockwave destroyed the entire city's foundation. The chaos origin power destroyed all dimensional order. All the dimensional portals were destroyed, and the residents of the lower planes would have to find another way to go to Asalivis if they wanted to. The devils, demons, and undead armies stationed in Asalivis. The devils, demons, and undead armies that hadn't been protected by powerful magical defenses probably suffered the same fate as Sophocles' enemies. They had long since returned to the Gui Ming River. The main goal of the Bardi Empire's allied army was to completely wipe out all the dimensional invaders and dimensional portals in Asalivis. This was achieved after Sophocles' explosion. The irony was that Sophocles had personally brought them to this world, and he had personally taken them away. The Eastern Battlefront had far more glorious results than the Western Battlefront. It was now confirmed that 4 main gods had died: Sophocles, Barbarat, Hymer, and the god of Holy Light's incarnation. Actually, when I saw this list of names, I made up my mind to run as far away as possible from the god of Holy Light's incarnation the next time I saw him. Sophocles was always bombed every time he appeared. He was even more of a calamity than I was. It's not the same thing, all right? Carolyn was a god with no personality. After someone analyzed his mechanical logic, luring one of his clones to a fixed location wasn't difficult at all. Killing his clones to weaken his main body was the only way to defeat him. Judging from the results, it would be correct to immediately run away from his clones in the future upon seeing his clones. However, he's always bombing wherever he goes. He's definitely different from your calamity incarnation. The silly cat was still in good spirits. At the very least, she still had the time to comment on me. It seemed that one person was missing from the list of the dead. Calamandas, the god of wisdom. Surprisingly, Calamandas had survived, but the god of wisdom had perished. The specific situation was quite complicated, so I won't talk about it for now. Cough, that was to say, there was no victor in this battle at all. If I had to find a victor, it would probably be Sophocles and Cavendish. And now, they had officially become the public enemy of the entire world. The Order faction, Chaos faction, and Hell faction had all suffered heavy losses in this explosion. Not to mention that their goal had been exposed, so everyone was eager to cause trouble for them. But unlike before, as the Chaos dimension was analyzed and stabilized, the Bardi faction would be exposed to the world. Nobody would give them any more time, because that would be the equivalent of the end of the world. The end of this battle was a sign that a new battle was about to begin. I really didn't know what to say about this. Meanwhile, the Mage Country's Truth Symposium members were currently focusing all their attention on analyzing the Chaos dimension. Perhaps this day would soon arrive. Counselor Roland, Counselor Ryan, and Counselor Marguerite have invited you to the third conference room. Tell them that I'll be there immediately. I casually responded to the tame demon's question as I got up and left. The mages were doing their best to regain their dignity after suffering such a major loss. And the first step would naturally be to analyze their enemies. Chapter 796. Sophocles was a demon king who always acted in a high-profile manner. He often used his incarnations and believers to travel the mortal plane. Only now did people realize that his high-profile manner was actually a type of disguise. If my inference is correct, no, based on my understanding of the gods, it's impossible for my inference to be wrong. Sophocles is a god with no personality. This misjudgment is the root cause of the current situation. There are only a few people sitting around in this spacious conference room. However, my current expression was likely rather unpleasant. After all, this wasn't the first time I had interacted with Sophocles. Only now did I realize that I was communicating with a divine power server that could only think logically and make logical deductions. This seemed rather foolish. At the very least, you discovered the truth after the fact. You're much better off than those who didn't even know the truth after being screwed over. Harlois, you're actually consoling me? You're so used to being so narcissistic. Of course you can think that. I glanced at the silly cat who was using her own method to encourage me. I took a deep breath and reorganized all the information I had in the past. This time, I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Sophocles, more accurately speaking, is no longer a demon from the Chaos Abyss. He's a pure order god. Although it's inconceivable, it's the only explanation for the current situation. Not only were the archmages of the Mage Country present, there was also Halen's special envoy, the Fairies' high-level editors, and the Ottoman Empire's Grand Duke Solon. Everyone really wanted to know what exactly had happened and why such an unforeseen event had occurred. As Sophocles' opponent, I probably had the most right to speak on this topic. In order to unify the upcoming battle, I needed to give everyone an explanation. Sophocles successfully used his incarnation to ascend to godhood. He's the god of evolution that everyone has long since forgotten. Perhaps this is a secret in the eyes of everyone, but it's no big secret to everyone here. However, there's one thing that probably nobody remembers. Perhaps everyone believes that the god of evolution has become nothing more than a joke and dark history after Sophocles' true identity was revealed. But actually, the god of evolution has always been living in Sophocles' body. I don't know what Sophocles was thinking, but over the long years, he indeed transformed most of his existence into the god of evolution who had no personal will. The Sophocles that everyone knows of is nothing more than a puppet created by the god of evolution who had no personal will. Sophocles had long since died as an intelligent individual. In fact, it was impossible to determine the exact date of his death. The most likely explanation was that the god of evolution completed his impersonation. That's right, dead people. When an intelligent being gave up on their sense of self, even if they were invincible, they wouldn't even have the concept of themselves. What was the difference between them and dead things? However, an inanimate object caused the entire world to tremble in fear, causing us to pay an unbearable price. The reason? Unreliable. Perhaps he had gone overboard in his pursuit of greater power and was devoured by his more rational and order clone. Perhaps he had forcefully split his mind and finally went insane, giving up on himself. Perhaps he had been deceived by others and walked down the wrong path. Cough. Although this sounded rather familiar, I was definitely referring to Sophocles, not Roland. What? Do you feel a little scared? You almost reached that step? Of course. I was scared. Now that I thought about it, if it wasn't for the fact that my system cheated on me, Sophocles would have died. There was no reason why I wouldn't have died back then. After repeated deductions, the truth about Sophocles as an individual was finally revealed. Although it seemed quite amusing, the result was quite difficult to laugh at. Sophocles was an order god who had crawled out from the corpse of a chaos main god. He wore the skin of a chaos main god and lived in the chaos abyss for countless years. He became Order's mortal enemy, and in the end, he sacrificed everything in order to fulfill his duty as an Order main god, pushing the natural order that he represented to the very peak. The root of everything is still his divine concept, evolution. A god with no personal will was just like a computer that only knew how to think mechanically and work hard. They would do their best to operate according to their predetermined plans, even if that would bring about their destruction. Perhaps a god with no personal will would place an incredibly high priority on their own safety. However, the foundational nature of an order god was that as long as their divine concept conflicted with their own will, they would definitely choose to carry out their divine concept. This was also why no matter how powerful a god with no personal will was, it wouldn't matter. A mechanical and inflexible way of thinking was the stupidest. A god with no personal will is far too inflexible. As long as I act according to your rules, I'll naturally be able to gradually weaken you. As long as I weaken you to a certain degree, I'll be able to easily kill you in the end. If my inference was correct, Sophocles and Cavendish had used the god of holy light's mechanical thinking to trick the god of holy light into sending an incarnation here. However, Sophocles was stronger than the god of holy light in that Sophocles was originally a chaos main god. Not only that, Sophocles' foundational nature of chaos allowed him to devour countless souls and memories, giving him an even more complete artificial intelligence. Sophocles' fake personality made him incredibly sly, and his disguise successfully fooled everyone. It was already too late by the time the truth was revealed. Sophocles' order divine concept was evolution, and the chaos abyss also pursued evolution. An order god had been promoting evolution in the chaos abyss for so many years, yet nobody noticed that something was wrong. And the key person in all of this is the other main god, Cavendish. All Cavendish had done was probably see through Sophocles' disguise and say, I have a plan that will allow me to truly evolve. Then, he would give Sophocles sufficient evidence and logical reasoning. Sophocles, who was a god with no personal will, would give up everything for the sake of fulfilling his divine concept. It could be said that Sophocles was nothing more than an inanimate object, a tool, or a murder weapon. The true culprit who had caused such a tremendous loss was the mastermind who had used this tool, Cavendish. From the very beginning, Sophocles had always been acting in front of me. He had even led me into his trap many times. Fortunately, I had never trusted Sophocles, so I never fell for his trap. As for who the mastermind behind all of this was, there was no need to mention it. As for whether or not Cavendish himself truly believed in pure evolution, I swore on my kneecap that if he truly believed in it, he would make me suffer the most miserable fate in the world, make me be single for the rest of my life. I can sense the evil intentions of the world. It's best that I don't make such a vow. It'll be different if you don't make a vow. Ahem. If Cavendish really did have some sort of faith, and I was wrong, then my second uncle's niece's second son was named Second Fool. Next time, everyone can just call him out and beat him up to vent their anger. You're still going to call everyone to beat up Cavendish? The silly cat's reaction was truly quick. Even this didn't make her dizzy. No, there's no need to push him. I simply sensed your evil intentions. I ignored the silly cat who was becoming more and more arrogant as I focused on my deductions. since it was already confirmed that Sophocles was a god with no personal will and a murder weapon. The remaining facts were simply my deductions. I had originally thought that Cavendish wouldn't have any allies, as nobody would have the same interests as a god of destruction. However, idealists believe that their ideals are more important than their own lives. Sophocles was an exception. From the very start, Sophocles and Sophocles had been on the same side. They had always been acting in front of us and everyone else. The other two chaos main gods had been tricked by Sophocles and Sophocles. Not only had Sophocles and Sophocles become cannon fodder for Sophocles and Sophocles, but they had also become backup sacrifices for Sophocles and Sophocles' ideals. Sophocles and Sophocles had tricked Sophocles and Sophocles. From the very start, Sophocles had never intended to save Sophocles. The Lord of Tyranny had also been nothing more than a backup sacrifice. If Sophocles had appeared on the Western battlefront, he would have been nothing more than an additional sacrifice. And now, Cavendish had already achieved his goal. He had made a sufficient number of sacrifices to make that chaotic dimensional door open. If we didn't stop Sophocles as soon as possible, everything would become irreversible. Now that the truth was right in front of us, it was quite obvious what we needed to do. Analyze the chaotic dimensional door and destroy it at all costs. And then kill Cavendish and end everything. Chapter 797. The battle in Bardi wasn't the only battle in this world. Although the news of main gods dying one after another was quite shocking, there was also new information from other battlefields. Out of all the information, the most eye-catching one was probably the Battle of Shidi. An undead army from another dimension ambushed the great demons, helping the human army in San Antonio achieve a great victory. The report said, these undead claim to be remnants of an ancient human empire. They've now returned to the mortal plane and established their capital in the northernmost island. They've also established a formal diplomatic relationship with the Mist Alliance. At this time, Sandro and the other undead emperors finally made their decision and decided where they would stand. The northernmost island that they were talking about didn't actually have a geographical name. It was the northernmost part of the continent. Further north, across the icy ocean, there was indeed a continent. However, due to the extreme temperature, only polar bears and snow monsters could live there. There's also Adam. He's basically family with those native great snow demons. I adjusted my eyeglasses slightly. Although Marguerite's tone was calm, I could sense the resentment in her voice. It would seem that my previous trip to the northernmost island hadn't left a good impression on her. However, getting lost in the northernmost ice continent was no longer a case of having no sense of direction. It was more like a curse. I heaved a sigh of relief when Marguerite and Adam returned. It was always a good thing to have trustworthy comrades by my side. Along with them came the Mist Alliance's reinforcements. Marguerite had just arrived, but she immediately started doing all the heavy work of rescuing people. Meanwhile, Adam was completely different from his usual self. He didn't go around causing trouble because he was bored. He was currently weaving a seemingly extravagant feather broom. However, we all knew that this was just an illusion. Adam, can you stop causing trouble? God Envoy Arthur already complained to me yesterday. No matter how many feathers a seraphim has, he'll eventually go bald if he keeps plucking them. It's just a warm-up. I can't take it anymore when I think about the upcoming battle. It's so rare to meet such a high-level opponent, and I don't have to worry about accidentally killing him. Yep, I should go find a seraphim to warm up. I'm going now. I won't be back for lunch. The more he spoke, the more excited he became. It seemed like flames were rising from his head, as if he was going to fight the angels for 3 days at any moment. If it wasn't for the fact that I received a report that Seraphim Feather Fan, Seraphim Tear, and other rare auction items had appeared in the Cloud Tower's black market, I would have believed it. As for the news of a certain pauper suddenly becoming rich and generously buying all the forbidden books in the book market, I didn't care about such boring things. I simply handed it over to Marguerite to deal with. The red light that night was truly bright. A certain man's despairing screams of "my collection" were indeed pitiful. Many married men even shed tears of sympathy for their fellow sufferers. What was even more pitiful was that he probably believed that the discovery of his new book collection was nothing more than an accident. He even intended to resell high-level angel feathers and other rare items in order to restock his stock. Wasn't he coming back for lunch? Seraphy in rare gods. So that he needed to? That all the god and was that should have in other in gods, that was that. Bye. Just as I was considering whether or not I should do my job as a counselor and investigate these ridiculous merchants, I noticed that Marguerite's mouth was twitching. Was that a smile? Marguerite was actually smiling so happily. All right then, I'd been seen through. Adam, take care of yourself. Forget it, I wasn't going to remind him. It would probably be nice to see a joke when I was depressed. Angels? That's right. The Cloud Tower now had 2 entire armies of high-level angels. Although in a way, they were indeed quite annoying, it was quite reassuring to have them as temporary allies. While we were preparing for war, the battlefield before us had yet to return to normal. At this point, Cavendish was basically declaring war on the entire world. The God of Holy Light's scheme was right in front of us. We didn't even have time to say anything as the ruler of the world. The God of Holy Light finally couldn't bear it any longer. His incarnation being destroyed was already the most serious challenge for him. Opening the door directly threatened the order of the entire world. This was the highest level of threat for his mechanical mind. And so, the God of Holy Light, who didn't have a personal god, unhesitatingly abandoned all restraint. The gods and angels of the Holy Light faction descended to the mortal world like dumplings being dropped into a pot. Battle angel armies were thrown onto the battlefield, and more than 1,000 years of accumulated resources were used up. There was no possibility of a ceasefire in this chaotic dimension created by the fall of a god. The Holy Light faction and angel squadrons unhesitatingly entered this chaotic battlefield. As for the cloud fortress that was closest to the battlefield, the Holy Light faction also sent 2 top-level squadrons and several dozen subsidiary squadrons to defend it. There were more than 30,000 angels scattered around, and the leader of the Holy Light faction, Arthur, seemed to be a legendary figure in history. As for whether these 2 top-level angel armies were here to protect the Cloud Tower or to threaten us heretics from acting rashly, everyone knew the answer to that. This was obviously a violation of the mage's dignity. However, I managed to convince the other counselors to accept the God of Holy Light's reinforcements. After all, it would be foolish to have a conflict with the God of Holy Light at such a time. If the God of Holy Light's mechanical mind decided to deal with the outside world first and turn around to attack us instead, we would be in deep trouble. Besides, it was quite rare to have such precious single-celled fighters. It would be a good thing even if they were just scouts. All we had to do was bear with it for a few days. The end result was that we would see angels flying above our heads every morning. These angels really did think that they were the masters of the city. They completely ignored the mage's morals. Cough. And so, the low-level and mid-level angels that were patrolling the city disappeared at a steady pace. High-level angels would often mysteriously be challenged by powerful individuals, which kept the God of Holy Light, Arthur, incredibly busy every day. As for whether the angels would end up as experimental subjects for insane mages or end up on the black market. Actually, when considering the fact that there was an abundant supply of angels and the constantly falling prices of goods, I even wanted a cheap and beautiful angel maid. Although it would be a pity if I didn't have any feelings for her, that also meant that she wouldn't slack off, wouldn't ask for money, and would be quite pleasing to the eye. She would be a great long-term worker. But recently, God of Holy Light Arthur had been complaining to me every day. If I bumped into him at such a critical time, it would be best if I didn't cause any new diplomatic incidents. You can ask Adam to help you buy one. You can even watch them make a fool out of themselves. Harlow's suggestion surprised me for a moment. I then chuckled and gave her a thumbs up. I liked this suggestion 32 times. And so, I directly started writing a letter to Adam using special paper that would self-destruct. My friend, please choose a young and beautiful angel maid. I'll help you stall Marguerite. Everyone knew that I was someone who never lied. Marguerite, give me some face. Let's let Adam off this time. Men always have their own unique needs. This isn't disloyalty. It's just a normal male need. At the very least, he didn't buy the most popular angel maid recently. Your face? How much is that worth? Marguerite smiled coldly as she picked up her staff and left. It would seem that not only had my words failed to extinguish her anger, they had even added fuel to it. Judging from her expression, she was about to go berserk. All right, I had already stalled him, but unfortunately, I hadn't managed to stall him. So, my friend, good luck. Roland, you seem to have a lot of resentment towards Adam. While you're fighting for your life on the battlefield, your best friend is fooling around and flirting with girls. The moment he sees you, he'll even tell you about his travel and leisure experiences. He'll even keep adding things like it's a pity you didn't go, otherwise you would have been so happy. What would you think? I understand. The silly cat nodded and continued pretending to be asleep. Only the sound of a pen scratching on paper could be heard in the room. There were already more than 10 letters stacked on the table. Some were letters, and some were replies. I had been quite busy over the past few days in order to gather all the manpower I had. Suddenly, the silly cat lifted her head. Both of us also looked towards the window. Apart from the familiar starlight, it was also because someone we had been waiting for so long had finally arrived. Sandro, since you're here, it would seem that you've already made a decision. Chapter 798. From a certain standpoint, the undead emperors could indeed be described as sly and cunning. When would be the best time to prove their innocence? Of course, it would be when a powerful common enemy appeared. Cavendish's sudden appearance made the undead emperors acceptable. Due to the previous battle against the ogres, the ancient undead had already expressed their stance. Now, the undead republic, which had taken over the entire glacier continent, was no longer a powerful enemy, but an ally that could be won over. At the very least, nobody would want the undead emperors to stand on the enemy's side until the Holy War ended. I felt rather conflicted as I looked at the seemingly friendly old man before me. Was Sandro trustworthy? Even if I thought with my knee, which had always been shot in the back, I knew that the undead emperors were untrustworthy. However, I indeed needed their help, just like how they needed us. The other factions wouldn't necessarily go all out against the powerful Cavendish and his allies. That was because it would be better for everyone if they won. There wouldn't be any actual benefits or spoils of war. Although everyone seemed to be quite loud about this public service event, I was actually quite doubtful about their morale and determination if they really had a fight to the death. However, Sandro and the other undead senators who had decided to rebuild the Ice Republic were different. Since they had chosen to ally with the humans instead of being enemies, they naturally wanted to prove their worth in this holy war. The first ones they needed to deal with were their own kind. I don't have any other requests. I won't give you random orders. I also know that you won't take my words seriously on the battlefield. But you should be able to take care of your own mess, right? I'll leave conservation and sharpness to you. Although we were allies, if I made too many requests, even if Sandro agreed, the benefits would be greatly reduced. It would be better to let them focus on taking care of their own kind. Sandro was quite straightforward as he directly agreed. However, he also made an additional request. I'll personally help Cavendish. Count me in. This was obviously beyond my expectations. Sandro was actually so enthusiastic about helping me. Pies that fell from the sky were always poisonous. For example, Sophocles had previously suggested that we work together to attack Cavendish together. I wouldn't have dared to accept it if he still had such good intentions. And from the darkness plane has died. She's also a chaos girl. She and you? I became even more astonished. The undead senators weren't exactly friendly creatures. Sandro, who had agreed to betray his teammates because of this, was actually trying to take revenge on Cavendish for the sake of his comrades. She is the granddaughter of my disciple, and also my adopted daughter. Sophocles' tone of voice was completely emotionless, making it impossible for me to tell if he was telling the truth or not. However, this was more than enough reason for me. At the very least, Sandro, who had a lot on his mind, wouldn't possibly side with Cavendish. It was highly unlikely that Sophocles' special situation would occur again. All right, I'll arrange it. After setting up a communication spell, Sandro transformed into nothingness and disappeared from our sight. Our senses were completely useless against him. Perhaps he had relied on this ability to enter the city of clouds, which was full of angels, as an undead. I also heaved a sigh of relief at Sandro's promise to fight on the battlefield. After all, the two undead emperors whose current situation was still unknown were most likely enemies, which gave me quite a bit of pressure. Sharpness might be fine, but if conservation met me on the battlefield, she would likely give up everything and unhesitatingly hunt me down. A super living cannon tower that specialized in offensive, forbidden spells and had limitless energy would forever be locked onto me. I felt that it would be better to make some preparations. Even if conservation's energy level was at the level of a main god, I still felt that she wouldn't be able to take advantage of Sandro. From a certain standpoint, although we hadn't obtained victory in the previous battle, I felt that the current situation wasn't that difficult to accept. At the very least, it's better than being in complete darkness. I had never worried about how hopeless or dark the situation would be, nor did I worry about how powerful my opponents would be. No matter how powerful a giant was, he or she would still have a weakness. But previously, Cavendish and his allies had been hiding in the shadows and making preparations. This was indeed quite a headache for me. The worst part wasn't how powerful your opponent was. It was that they were hiding in the shadows while you were out in the open. They were digging traps for you to jump into, and you could only let them lead you by the nose. Although Sandro and his allies had achieved astonishing results on the battlefield, the chaotic dimension also exposed their existence and weaknesses. As long as they appear before us, we would at least be able to target them instead of just passively dealing with them. I wasn't some immortal who was ridiculously intelligent. In order to make the correct strategic decision, the prerequisite was to have accurate information. As Cavendish and his allies officially revealed themselves, his goal and his allies were gradually revealed to the world. Their goal was quite clear. They wanted to collect the Chaos Girls and obtain the key to open the dimensional walls. Then, they would use the dimensional door that was currently forming in the chaotic dimension to open up an exit to the outside world. In that case, Sandro and his allies had obviously exposed three major weaknesses. The first is to stop them from searching for the Chaos Girls. The second is to attack that chaotic dimension and completely destroy their dimensional door. The third is, I pause for a moment before finally saying it out loud, to completely kill Cavendish and eliminate all future threats. The core of this entire incident was Sandro himself. No matter how I looked at it, it would be the easiest way to destroy him physically in order to foil his scheme. I would deal with my own problems by myself, fill up my own hole by myself, and deal with my own problems by myself. Cough, just like how I had left the two undead emperors to Sandro to deal with. I had no intentions of leaving Cavendish to anyone else to deal with. But for Cavendish and his allies, yesterday's victory had become today's burden. That chaotic dimension hadn't completely stabilized yet when the holy light gods hurriedly started a fierce attack. Since the dimensional door's location had already been confirmed, the holy light gods didn't even have the space to retreat. Now, that chaotic dimension had truly become the ancient battlefield of the holy war. Countless demons and angels were fighting against each other, but it was still impossible for a victor to appear. 10 years ago, the death of a certain god would have attracted the attention of the entire continent. But over the past few days, meteor showers have been falling in the sky. It was impossible to count how many holy light gods had died. Even low-level god envoys and high-level angels had become cannon fodder on the battlefield. Even I didn't want to get close to such a battlefield. Even the proud dragons had wisely chosen to retreat. The main gods of holy light, Cavendish, and the other main god-level existences, as well as the higher-ups of both sides, all remained abnormally silent. This wasn't because there was a possibility of peace negotiations. Rather, both sides were accumulating their strength in preparation for the final battle. Every day, not only would we receive the remains of the war angels from the front lines, Cavendish's mutated demon specimens would also be sent back from the front lines. As we analyzed the specimens, our chances of victory kept increasing. Finally, I received a piece of information that made it necessary for me to head to another battlefield. Cavendish is attacking the fire elemental plane? At such a critical moment, I fell silent. Others might not know what the fire elemental plane represented, but I did. Eliza, Chapter 799. As the masters of the elements, mages would always have some sort of connection with the elemental planes. Not long ago, mages had even constructed bases in the various elemental planes in order to collect resources and choose talents. The smallest of these bases was the fire elemental plane. In fact, it could only be described as a temporary base. In the Cloud Tower's records, the other elemental planes and outer planes bases were all described as certain cities or towns. However, the fire elemental planes base was described as a fire elemental plane observation room. When I arrived at the fire elemental plane, I discovered that even the name of an observation room was exaggerated. There is only a dimensional door buried deep underground and some specially preserved food and water. The mage stationed at the fire elemental plane greeted me in surprise when he saw me walk out of the dimensional door. However, he was obviously depressed when he discovered that I wasn't one of the mages who had switched shifts with him. Master Roland, if it's possible, please suggest to the higher-ups that we cancel this fire elemental plane observation room and just keep the dimensional door. Last year, we only left the fire elemental plane 2 times a year, and the number of visitors we received was less than 2 digits. The middle-aged mage named Modi started complaining endlessly about the bastard's working environment when he saw the truth emblem on my chest. The fact that he didn't recognize me at all doubtlessly meant that he hadn't returned to the mortal plane for a very long time. Although the other elemental planes were tough, they were quite beneficial for mages who specialized in elemental magic. The high elemental tide was a great thing for magic cultivation. The local elemental resources could be used to increase one's income by 10%. There were quite a few mages who were willing to apply for a fire elemental plane observation room every year. As Modi complained, I learned that no mage in the fire elemental plane had ever applied for a fire elemental plane observation room. The observation room was forcefully assigned to fire mages. The extremely harsh environment and high temperatures were one of the reasons. However, the main reason was that the fire elemental plane's native residents were far too hospitable. Middle-level and low-level elemental creatures didn't need to eat. If they weren't driven by someone, this was basically impossible in the mortal plane. They wouldn't be able to come to the mortal plane without being summoned or driven by someone. They wouldn't be very aggressive in most situations. Only fire elemental creatures would be as active as rabid dogs and unhesitatingly attack any living target. And it just so happened that fire elemental creatures were incredibly valuable opponents. It would be fine if they could win, but if they couldn't, they would self-destruct. Finally, they would painstakingly achieve victory, and it was likely that all the elemental materials they had collected would have been destroyed. Not only that, this was their home turf, so it would be impossible to kill them. Nobody would like such opponents. In a sense, the fire elemental plane was the elemental plane closest to the abyss. Many fire elemental lords had dual identities as demons and elemental creatures. Most demons had fire elemental bloodlines in their bodies, so they had extraordinary fire resistance. Here, the high temperature and sulfuric air made it impossible for mortals to survive. The extremely aggressive elemental residents were a disaster for any outsider. Mage Modi, who was in front of me, had faint dark runes flowing on her skin. Her eyes were also faintly glowing with a fiery light. It was obvious that she was also a member of the Chaos Abyss. The red magic runes on her arms and legs were obviously unique to fire archmages. A demonkin with a fire-type bloodline. It seemed his rank wasn't low either. What a rare creature. I felt rather sorry for this unlucky bastard. I heard that he had already been stationed here for 7 years. Based on the usual 3 to 5 year cycle, he should have been replaced long ago. And since Modi had finished his mission, he should have been transferred back to the headquarters for a promotion, a pay raise, and a fair, rich, and beautiful wife. Obviously, either he couldn't find a suitable candidate, or he had already been forgotten by the headquarters. That was why he was so friendly with every passerby, hoping to pass on his message. Only a few people come every year. On average, you don't see a single person every month. Even if you want to find someone to talk to, you're so unlucky. Yeah, I thought that my bloodline was suitable for such an environment. I was so lucky. Not only did I see a single person every month, the worst time was when I didn't see a single person for 1 year and 3 months. Whenever I went out, all I saw were those endless mad dogs and bomb maniacs. I originally had an acolyte, but he left without any protection after only 4 weeks. He was sent back to the mortal plane with burns and poison all over his body. That bastard was burnt to a crisp, but he was still smiling when he left. I'm going to take care of him when I get back. But I heard from the last guest that he was already promoted to be at the same rank as me. This is the result of not talking to anyone for a long time, was that I would immediately become a chatterbox when I had the chance. In the past, Modi's acolyte had managed to reach the same rank as himself, but he had been held back for many years because of a rubbish position that was sent out to the outside world. He hadn't made any progress at all as he watched other youngsters climb above him, while he himself was still wasting his time. Wasn't this the real-life version of a midlife crisis? The more I looked at it, the sadder I felt. It was no wonder that he was so friendly. It was probably because of my truth emblem that he hoped that I would be able to speak up for him at the Truth Symposium. Sure, it's no big deal. I'll talk to the Truth Symposium when I get back. Is Senator Ryan in charge of sending people out to the outside world? I'm quite familiar with him. I immediately agreed, but I still didn't add any cold water when I saw how overjoyed the Archmage was. The current Modi was probably in exile from the headquarters. It was rare for him to meet a high-ranking official from the headquarters, so of course he would try his best to curry favor with Modi in hopes of changing things for the better. But as far as I could remember, the Truth Symposium was currently in the midst of a full-scale war. They wouldn't have any spare time to take care of the people who were sent out to the outside world. It was just like World War II in my previous world. When the major countries fought against each other, the overseas colonies that were far away from home would be long forgotten. Not to mention, the Truth Symposium would be an isolated island with no resources, no actual combat information, and no practical use for the Truth Symposium. It was likely that Modi would be forgotten for a very long time before the war. Perhaps the Truth Symposium would be re-established after the war, and if his previous superior died in battle or was sent to another position, Modi would still be forgotten by the new superior. Of course, saying anything right now would be meaningless. After all, everything was still changing. Perhaps as the Holy War continued, the elemental planes would become meaningless. Perhaps the elemental planes would be cancelled, and Modi would naturally return. Or perhaps the mages would have higher expectations for the elemental planes and invest more into them. As a veteran here, this would also be a chance for Modi to rise up. Continue working hard. At the very least, the situation won't get any worse than it already is. I said something that sounded like a polite encouragement. It would be best not to make any random promises at a time like this. However, I was already satisfied with such an answer. Modi's eagerness also helped me quite a bit. I had been stationed here for so long, constantly being attacked by the fire element. I was so bored that I could only desperately cultivate. Although Modi didn't have a high position, his power level far surpassed his peers. I could sense that this dark-skinned, middle-aged man had actually broken through the legend rank and faintly reached the level of saint. However, his emblem was only a gold emblem. 10 years ago, a saint-ranked archmage like Modi wouldn't have been left here to waste his time. Not only did Modi understand the situation here, his combat strength was also quite high. This allowed him to travel through this dangerous plane. His rather boring job had helped him greatly in developing new planes. At the very least, he could be said to be an expert in the fire elemental plane. Thanks to Modi's introduction, I was gradually able to see the most recent developments in the fire elemental plane. The new fire elemental god? When did this happen? Why haven't there been any reports? I've already made a report. I wrote a report 5 days ago, but I haven't received any response. Did something happen in the cloud tower? Chapter 800. The new elemental god? That's super important information. Why hasn't anyone reported it? I reported it 5 days ago, but I haven't received any response. Did something happen in the cloud tower? Of course, Modi's report wouldn't receive any response. 5 days ago, the Truth Symposium had been incredibly busy. How could they possibly have the time to respond to an unimportant information report? However, this information was incredibly important to me. The new fire elemental god should be called One Grain of Sand. What a strange name. Shouldn't that be the name of the earth elemental god? One grain of sand? I was even an egg, Illidan. Although I would always end up making all sorts of jokes when I translated people's names back and forth, such as a certain Chiang Kai-shen. But when I heard this name, I actually didn't feel surprise or doubt. Instead, I had a strange feeling of it really is her. Eliza was a fire sea marchioness, and she also had the ability to devour fire and ice to evolve. With these two abilities, in this elemental plane where delicious food was everywhere, as long as she lowered her limits and evolved again, as long as she had enough time, there would likely be no elemental lord that could defeat her. But that wasn't what made me feel annoyed or even sad. It would seem that she still doesn't believe in you. No, perhaps it's precisely because she believes in you that she chose this path. Sometimes the silly cat's comments would catch me off guard. This time, I silently agreed with her. The battle against the Chaos Girls was probably coming to an end. Neither the remaining victors nor the losers would be easy to deal with. Even I didn't have absolute confidence that I could guarantee Eliza's safety. And now, Cavendish's scheme was coming to an end. The only remaining Chaos Girls had become precious strategic resources. The usual way to deal with such important strategic resources was that if we couldn't obtain them, we absolutely couldn't let our enemies obtain them. If Eliza had asked me for help, of course I would have done my best to protect her. But fate was unpredictable. There was always a possibility. If there's no turning back, and only by sacrificing her can you save the world, what else would you not be willing to sacrifice if you're even willing to sacrifice yourself? That silly girl, is she afraid that you'll be troubled, or does she have no confidence in you? I think it's both. Even if the probability was very small, it couldn't be denied. Just the existence of this probability was enough for Eliza to choose to survive alone. Perhaps she was afraid that I would make a choice when danger descends. The only one that can be relied on is oneself. Although I had instilled such a concept into Eliza before, I was still rather heartbroken to be treated like this at this time. This girl is looking down on me too much. If we have to sacrifice a woman to save the world, then we might as well destroy the world. I'm not a saint, nor am I the creator who controls the power of life. Everyone has family and friends, and existence itself is a kind of value. Life has its own weight, and apart from oneself, no one has the right to ask others to sacrifice themselves. I respected brave warriors who risked their lives for justice because there were indeed some things in this world that were more important than life itself. However, I despised those bastards who said, if too many people die, they're just a number. I also sincerely hoped that they would become one of the numbers they spoke of as soon as possible. Sacrifice is a virtue? Why didn't the person who said this stare at first? Harlois was rather surprised to sense that I wasn't just saying something nice. Then what would you do if you really met such a situation? Watch the world be destroyed? No, I would do my best to find a third method that would be the best of both worlds. Actually, I already had a final plan. For example, I could create a small room made of adamantine with sufficient food and control and have the Chaos Girls fall into a deep sleep. Then, I could stuff them into a certain dimensional core area and release them after we're done with the battle. Or, I could use the method and coordinates that Beifong gave me to send the Chaos Girls out of He. Although it would be a pity that they wouldn't be able to return, it's still better than dying here. For some people, this would be worse than death. Harlois shook her head. This was basically the same as not saying anything at all. Eliza definitely wouldn't agree to such a plan. I shrugged. That was why I called it a final plan, a method that would only work if there was no other way. At the very least, it was much better than the previous two options. But now, Eliza had evidently chosen to believe in me. Successfully ascending to the fire elemental god throne would also be a type of sacrifice. Not only would she gain control of the fire elemental plane, but the fire elemental plane would also bind her to it. And as long as Eliza's soul didn't die, this binding would probably last for eternity. And now, if Cavendish still refused to give up, he would have to face an elemental god who controlled the entire fire elemental plane. As I previously mentioned, the elemental gods in their own fire elemental planes wouldn't be any weaker than the main gods. This was especially true since Eliza was already quite strong to begin with. She had even strengthened herself after ascending to the fire elemental god throne. It would be absolutely difficult for Cavendish to defeat her. Let's go and take a look at the battlefield. The information I obtained was from 3 days ago. The chaos domain was still being analyzed, and everything was still unclear. At that time, Cavendish's army was already attacking the fire elemental plane. Considering the size and scale of the fire elemental plane, it would be perfectly normal for the fire elemental plane to fight for several hundred years if the goal was to eliminate the fire elemental gods. No matter how special the situation was, the fire elemental plane was still ongoing. I felt more and more like Cavendish was being irrational. Forcefully attacking the fire elemental plane at such a time was definitely an unwise decision. But looking at it from a different angle, perhaps it was also because Eliza had decided to go all out, forcing him into a situation where he couldn't back down. Perhaps there's a chance. If I could obtain Eliza's assistance in stalling Cavendish's main forces, or even himself, here, then the pressure on a mortal plane would be greatly reduced. And in the fire elemental planes, the elemental lords and high-level elemental creatures were capable of repeatedly reviving. They were the best cannon fodder in the world. I didn't believe that attacking the fire elemental plane would be a wise decision. Back in the day, I had forced myself to challenge Omdorokin not only because he had gone too far in the Northlands, but also because I wanted to kill him while he was seriously injured. I had only been able to win because he had been away from the Earth elemental plane for far too long. He had long since developed a bad connection with the Earth elemental throne, which was far from normal. I admired Cavendish's confidence in challenging an elemental god who was in perfect condition, had limitless power, and had limitless regenerative abilities. Don't think too highly of yourself. Since Cavendish dared to do such a thing, he's likely confident. I nodded. Right now, our most important goal was to find out just what that confidence was. Chapter 801. I had traveled through countless planes, including the upper planes that were filled with holy light and positive energy, as well as the chaos abyss, which was filled with distortion and chaos. I didn't know which plane had the deepest impression of me and was the most suitable for traveling, but the fire elemental plane was definitely one of the worst planes for tourists. Not only was the air incredibly hot and poisonous, I was ambushed 6 times in less than 10 minutes. From berserk fire demons to low-level fire elemental creatures that I could crush at any moment, they would unhesitatingly charge at me the moment they saw me. The only difference was that the fire elemental creatures' roars when they attacked were different. If they could win, they would attack head-on. If they couldn't win, they would self-destruct. The fire elemental creatures here were even more berserk and disgusting than the ones in the mortal plane. Are they ever going to stop? They're like cockroaches. Every time we see one, there's a dozen of them. There's no end to this. I started complaining since I didn't feel like I was making any progress. If you deactivate your domain, we'll probably be able to travel much faster. What? Deactivate the air conditioning? No, I'd rather kill my way over than be dehydrated by the heat. The air outside was poisonous and spicy, while the air around me was clean and cool. It was snowing faintly above my head. As a self-proclaimed ice archmage at the truth level, it would be far too terrible of me if I couldn't even change the environment around me. However, Modi was still freeloading off the air conditioning. Even though he was clearly feeling quite comfortable, he kept trying to convince me to deactivate my ice domain. Archmage Roland, I apologize for underestimating your spell-casting ability in the fire elemental plane to summon such a powerful ice domain. However, Your actions are equivalent to declaring war on all fire elemental creatures in the area. I waved my hand and interrupted his question. I smiled as I looked at the sky above me, where a red raven covered in magma was circling above me. At this level of power, I had finally met an elemental lord-level existence. We're finally here. Rather than randomly walking around like this, why don't we find a guide? An elemental lord should know where their god is. Yep, it'll tell me. I'm certain. 10 minutes later, the fire raven that had become incredibly docile soared in the sulfur-smelling sky. I was now able to comfortably lie on its back and look down at the scenery. However, ice shards were still falling from its fiery wings on the upper half of its body. Its pitiful appearance made people worry about whether it would suddenly fall from the sky. Did I go too far? It's fine. In this plane, as long as the fire elemental creatures don't die on the spot, they can quickly recover from any kind of injury. The silly cat was still crawling on my head. Although she was still in her black cat form, she wasn't a clone this time. Instead, she was using a transformation spell to transform into a cat form, which confused me. Aren't you very busy? I'm worried about you. Huh, what's there to worry about? If we can win, we'll fight. If we can't, we'll just run away with Eliza. Although the bug-like world has been destroyed, I'm still very confident in my ability to survive. Although I wasn't used to seeing a cat's expression, this cat definitely glared at me just now. She even used my head to sharpen her claws. What did I do to offend her? It's precisely because you think that I'm worried. The silly cat sighed yet again with an expression of an incorrigible idiot. Even though she was just a silly cat, she actually dared to look down on me? Just as I was thinking about whether or not I should feed her milk or find a chance to throw the cat from the sky, the scene before me finally changed. What was before me was no longer bright red. In the distance, a pitch-black dimensional door was quite eye-catching. The familiar power of chaos was doubtlessly another dimensional door leading to the chaos abyss. There were black and red dots the size of ants on the ground. Were they clashing? Doubtlessly. It was a battle between demons and fire elemental creatures. I could faintly sense the explosion of magic power in the triple digits. This was an elemental lord fighting against a powerful demon. Without a doubt, we had entered another battlefield, and the intensity of the battle was quite high. Judging from the approaching black and red dots, we had company. At this time, I didn't want to waste any more time on this meaningless battle. Meaningless? There were countless demons in the chaos abyss. Even though he was the youngest demon main god, he still had an astronomical number of demon soldiers and generals under his command. In the previous battles, he hadn't mobilized his main forces, so it was impossible to calculate how many he had. However, it was impossible for him to finish all the battles in a short period of time. This was even more true for the fire elemental plane. As long as they didn't die on the spot, the fire elemental creatures would recover incredibly quickly. Even if they died, they would be able to quickly regenerate. I was becoming more and more confused. Attacking the fire elemental planes was meaningless to begin with. If I was in Cavendish's position, rather than sending an army to attack, I would have directly led a few main god-level subordinates to form a small ambush squad. That would have a higher chance of success in forcefully kidnapping the fire elemental lords. What confused me even more was that although I sensed many fire elemental and chaos lord-level mana sources, there weren't many that gave me a sense of threat. There weren't any powerful gods or main god-level existences on the battlefield either. If it was on such a large scale, Eliza wouldn't even need to personally take action. I had originally thought that Cavendish would send a sufficient number of elites and powerful individuals to participate in this battle. However, while the demons below weren't weak, they were obviously far from the top-level combat strength that I had expected. I casually summoned a blizzard and tossed it at a fire dragon that got too close and was baring its fangs and claws. I then exploded with magic power that far surpassed that of a saint rank in order to chase away the fire dragons that were looking at me with unfriendly gazes. Half a minute later, my magic explosion attracted a certain person's attention as expected. A familiar magical wave rose up from the volcanoes in front of me. bright red, magical waves transformed into a tsunami that swept across the battlefield. Even the Chaos Lords lowered their proud heads in the areas that the tsunami touched. Just the fact that the Chaos Elemental Lord's attention was enough to double the combat strength of the Chaos Elemental Lords. Compared to my memories, this mana source was far stronger. It was like the difference between a torch and the sun. In fact, this mana source was several times stronger than Onderoken's from back in the day. Perhaps this was what an elemental god should be like. Compared to what I had expected, the current elemental gods were far more powerful. I also knew that I had reached my goal. The master of this dimension had noticed my arrival and sent me an invitation. Modi, go back and do your own work for now. I'll report what happened to you to the Truth Symposium. Just relax and wait for my news. I changed my mind. At such a distance, it would be faster for me to fly by myself. I directly had that Firebird take Modi back as I flew towards the volcanoes that had sent me the invitation. However, the silly cat on my head didn't seem willing to continue acting as a mascot. Roland, I know. You don't need to say anything. At the very least, let me see her first. Chapter 802. While Roland was busy fighting against the demons in the fire elemental plane, the flames of war in the mortal plane didn't stop. In fact, they even burned even more fiercely. Howland would never have imagined that the war he started in order to reclaim lost territory would ultimately cause Barty to forever lose that territory. In the past, Victoria Port's outer forest area was known as Asalivis. But today, it was the battlefield of the gods and demons, the front lines of light and shadow. Countless demons crossed dimensions to arrive. They came in all shapes and sizes. The only thing they all had in common was their anger from being forcefully summoned by the Chaos Abyss, as well as their violent and easily angered tempers. Nobody knew how Cavendish had accomplished this, but he had indeed accomplished it. The will of the Chaos Abyss had summoned countless creatures of chaos from all other dimensions to participate in this final battle between the gods and demons. In this area where there was no blue sky to cover the battlefield, angels and demons fought each other in every corner of the dimensional cracks. However, it was still difficult for either side to gain an advantage. No matter how many troops they sent, no matter how powerful the war angels and gods were sent to this battlefield, the endless sea of demons would treat them all the same. Forcefully attacking this chaotic dimension at this time wouldn't be a wise choice for the Holy Light faction gods and angels. The broken and chaotic dimensional laws of this world made it obvious that the creatures of order were at a disadvantage on this battlefield. Demons, who were skilled at melee combat and chaotic battles, naturally enjoyed such a scene. However, their main god, who usually lacked enthusiasm and presence, was now angrily roaring in battle. He constantly urged the gods and their warriors to enter this dimension of death. It was as if he was a gambler who had gone crazy from gambling, hurriedly throwing everything he had accumulated over thousands of years into this hopeless battlefield. Eradicate the world's poison. Destroy it. Cavendish, destroy the dimensional door to the dimensional barrier. This was the will and fury of the strongest main god. When the god of holy light, Ka Roland, personally arrived on the battlefield, this vague will drove the Holy Light faction gods to bring all of their power and servants to offer their final loyalty to their master's glory and order faction. True gods could also fall on this battlefield. The meteors in the sky turned into torrential rain. The enraged god of war used his body to break through the barrier of space in search of his prey. The fallen Valkyrie did not have a chance to return to their divine throne. There was no difference between civil and military jobs, only the difference between the hunter and the prey. The famous and respected oracles shouted angry slogans and launched desperate attacks. Even the imps could sneer and return the enthusiasm of their opponents with fireballs. The abyss also suffered heavy losses. Countless demon lords and demon nobles had already fallen in this region. The ancient ones, who had dominated countless planar battlefields, had entered this battlefield where there was no chance of retreat. Their deaths were no different from that of a young demon born 10 years ago. When the Holy Light faction's war machine was activated, the gods joined forces and directly tore apart the battlefield's defenses. The will of the Chaos Abyss urged the ancient demons and newborn demon nobles to enter the battlefield. Then, they would all die or self-destruct in a few seconds or a few dozen minutes. Not to mention, the furious god of Holy Light was unstoppable on the battlefield. He repeatedly broke through the Chaos Abyss's defenses. The high-level war angels were summoned by the gods of high heaven who were in dire straits. They could also burn their own life force to complete their mission. However, they called it a glorious sacrifice rather than a desperate self-destruction. Correspondingly, countless of their own kind were forced to enter this battlefield. The imps and demon nobles were essentially no different from each other. Even after they used up their last bit of power, they would still be mercilessly transformed into flesh bombs to offer their final loyalty to the Chaos Abyss. The gods and demons were all the same on the battlefield where there was no mercy or retreat. However, the Holy Light faction's target, the dimensional door of chaos, which was constructed from black iron and bronze, and which was decorated with the statues of the two goddesses of chaos as its pillars, wasn't destroyed at a rate visible to the naked eye. Instead, the dimensional door of chaos became even more active as more and more sacrifices appeared in this chaotic dimension. Demons, Chaos Abyss residents, gods, and angels died. The flames of war in the mortal plane had never been so intense before. The merciless god of Holy Light had never appeared on the battlefield so angrily before. His anger was also a sign of his power. There's not much time left. Yes, there wasn't much time left. Unlike what everyone expected, the dimensional door to the dimensional door had been activated 2 days ago. It was slowly opening. Only the god of Holy Light, who is under the control of the source of order, vigilantly discovered this problem. He intended to destroy this entire region at all costs in order to completely destroy this ticking time bomb that was bound to the world of He. Cavendish didn't appear on this battlefield because he knew that if he appeared, the god of Holy Light would do everything in his power to destroy him. However, Cavendish was still the mastermind behind all of this. The sly Chaos Abyss Prince's trick had worked. The first trap had been activated. The mechanical logical thinker unhesitatingly jumped into the trap with all of his power. The arrogant Holy Light faction didn't intend to call for reinforcements either. At this time, in order to stop a certain unpredictable factor, Carwins had also set up another trap. And this time, it was aimed at a mortal F***. Something's wrong with this situation. I couldn't help but curse at the scene before me. I even had the urge to turn around and run. I passed through the endless sea of flames. What I saw wasn't an erupting volcano, nor was it the boiling Earth's core. Instead, I saw a familiar scene. A familiar street, a familiar house, and a familiar person. A silver-haired half-demon wearing black and white maid attire was waiting for me in front of my old residence in Sulphur Mountain City. What was slightly different was that I had always ridiculed her for being a waste of looks and always forcing herself to be serious. But now, she had a playful smile that was difficult to understand. "Master, welcome home." What made me feel like something was wrong was the maid before me. How could the Chaos Abyss Prince possibly attack and kidnap her? She was far more powerful than any main god I had ever met. Chapter 803. Men would always have their own little hobbies. When you return home after a busy day and were so tired that you wanted to just lie down on the street, a cute girl wearing a lace-made outfit would greet you at your door with a sweet smile. "Master, welcome home. Would you like to eat first, or take a bath first, or cough, cough?" All men would understand the rest. I admit that I was a complete maid lover, but a man should always have some hobbies. If a man isn't a pervert, can he still be considered a normal man? Back in the day, I confidently said this and asked Eliza to welcome me and wake me up every day. Of course, it was the healthy version. What could I possibly do when I was just a skeleton? However, I would never forget the icy expression in her eyes when she looked at me. What followed was an entire month of cold violence. In fact, in order to make her obediently wear a maid outfit every day, not only did I threaten her with raising me, I even nearly kneeled down and hugged her legs. Cough, cough, did I say anything? From a certain standpoint, fine. From a gentlemanly standpoint, Eliza's education was a complete failure. I really don't understand. She was clearly so cute and obedient when she was young. How did she become an iron virgin like Marguerite when she grew up? All these years, apart from when she was still a little girl, she would always do whatever I told her to do. She would always smile sweetly and say things like, "Welcome home, master," or "Master, be careful on your way home." But when she became slightly more mature, her childhood memories became a dark history that would immediately go berserk whenever I mentioned them. Now, the familiar iciness in her silver eyes had melted. She lifted her skirt and said my favorite line in her sweet voice. She was perfect in both appearance and attitude. She was basically the perfect maid that I could only dream of. However, I felt chills running down my back as goosebumps appeared all over my body. This time, perhaps I'm really going to die. 10 minutes later, I was lying in my home's courtyard and enjoying myself. I felt even more dazed as I looked at the familiar scenery around me. I wasn't some newbie who had never seen anything grand before. I had seen many domains and environments, and I had also seen more than 100 soul worlds that were incredibly different from reality. However, the old residence before me was exactly the same as what I remembered. It was completely real. The black pearl grapes growing on the grapevine behind him were rare magical plants. They were bitter and unpleasant to eat, but when brewed into wine, not only would they taste abnormally delicious, they would also have the miraculous effect of suppressing souls. Furthermore, they were an extremely rare magic potion ingredient. Black pearl wine was one of the few foods that high-level undead could enjoy. In order to successfully grow it, I'd spent a lot of effort. This garden was set up for it, but if I moved it away from its original location, it would have instantly withered. But now those small and black grapes were exactly the same as in my memory. The most incomprehensible part wasn't the magical plant itself, but the rack under the grapevine. The leftmost pillar had over 100 knife cuts on it. That was the path of a certain someone's growth. And now, it was exactly the same as it had been in the past. The appearance of an illusion and the projection of a soul world would have certain requirements for the controller. Only the controller would know and remember things in their soul worlds. Even if things weren't like that in reality, as long as one's obsession was strong enough, one would be able to change reality. But looking at it from a different perspective, if the controller didn't know and didn't pay attention, they would naturally miss out on such things. The familiar bitter taste of Requiem wine danced on the tip of my tongue. Requiem wine was poisonous to the living, but I sank into my memories. There were many small details that Eliza couldn't possibly have noticed back in the day, but now they were all right in front of me. It was as if she was truly in control of the world. I had never even heard of such an ability before. The current Eliza was becoming more and more unfathomable to me. Stop guessing. This is my old residence in Sulphur Mountain City. I took a trip there and directly brought it out. Cough, cough. You should have told me earlier. I almost choked to death. I spat out a mouthful of blood. At this moment, only the word embarrassment could be seen on my face. After I calmed down and took one last look at this familiar scenery, I felt even more reluctant to leave. How could this girl be so wasteful? Wouldn't everything be destroyed if we started fighting? This was my old home. That's right, if we started fighting, I knew from the moment I saw Eliza that it would be impossible for things to end peacefully. Not only had I been tricked, I'd been tricked by the person I trusted the most. But some things still had to be faced in the end. Eliza, no. Cynthia, when did you start to ally with Cavendish? I laughed as I asked this question with anger in my voice. I hoped for a negative answer, but sometimes reality was so cruel. The Eliza before me was far more powerful than any main god I had ever met. There was only one possibility for her inconceivably powerful strength. She, Eliza, was the victorious Chaos Girl. She was the new Chaos Goddess Cynthia. Cavendish was hunting Chaos Girls in order to have the chosen Chaos Girl become the true Cynthia and obtain the power of the Creator Goddess. I had originally thought that the chosen Chaos Girl would be one of the Devil Lords. Harlowe's mother, or Leona. After all, a chaos girl becoming Cynthia wasn't a personality change. Rather, it was an individual who had devoured another main god using the law of the jungle to improve in all aspects. If I had been in Cavendish's position, I would naturally have helped my own people benefit. But now, Eliza had become the new Cynthia. There was only one explanation for this. After the War of the Hades, he came to find me, and we formed an alliance based on certain benefits. To be honest, your younger brother is much easier to deal with. I finally understood why Eliza had been missing for so long recently. Once the Chaos Girls began hunting, the rapidly evolving Eliza would naturally expose everything if she appeared in front of me. In that case, the betrayal had been going on for at least 10 years. Perhaps a lot of information hadn't been leaked by the Chaos Abyss Bloodline Kings. Perhaps my secretary was the highest level spy in the Chaos Abyss. I became more and more confused and even angry. Common benefits? What common benefits would Cavendish and Eliza have? Opening the dimensional door would be a good thing for a bastard like Cavendish who loved to see the world in chaos. But what benefits would Eliza gain? Did she forget all the law that I had taught her back in the day? Did she understand that becoming a demon would make her agree with demons' foolish worldview and the law of the jungle? Your younger brother feels that you'll be a hindrance, so he wants to restrict you, especially since he knows what you intend to do. As for me, what do you think I want the most? Eliza was sitting in front of me. Her cheeks were red from the alcohol that she wasn't used to drinking. A cool breeze blew past, and her long silver hair flowed in the wind. However, I was rather astonished by her words. I paused. What Eliza wanted. Perhaps I had never thought about it before. What do you want? Ever since we were young, I've given you anything you wanted. If you need anything, you can just tell me directly. What can Cavendish give you? Roland. What? Why was she calling my name at this time? However, the silly cat claws on my head were causing my scalp to hurt. You've probably never thought about why I'm willing to give up everything to follow you. I sank into contemplation upon hearing this. Perhaps it was because I was already used to her following me, but I had indeed never thought deeply about the reason for her loyalty. She still spoke in a calm tone, but the trembling of her wine glass revealed the excitement in her heart. Eliza took a deep breath and decided to tell me everything. Ruling the world? Saving the world? The law of honor? Undefeatable power? What meaning do all these things have to a woman? Why do you think a woman like me would risk my life so much to the point of entering the chaos abyss and even devouring a disgusting demon's heart? Even if I was a pig, I should have an answer by now. However, I was unable to accept such an answer. Idiot, I'm a woman. Of course what I want is a woman's happiness. Roland, Cavendish's promise is to give Roland to me forever, eternally, and only. And now, you've come as expected. Harlowe's face was filled with a mysterious blush of embarrassment. However, my current expression was filled with the word embarrassment. As I expected, the silly cat's sigh seemed like a belated statement. Chapter 804. Cavendish, you skipped class again? You're dead for sure this time. Kelly's really angry. Memories of the past always made me reminisce. Even now, I could still remember that Cavendish had never been a good student. The Mist Kingdom back then wasn't rich at all. However, the royal family's homework was quite heavy because of this. Culture, politics, economics, and diplomacy. Sometimes the endless homework would give me a headache, not to mention the fun and active Cavendish. Since he was a member of the royal family, and the tutor's ruler wasn't heavy enough, it was quite common for him to skip class. And every time he skipped class, I would be the one to find him in the end. No matter if it was on the roof of the royal palace, in a corner of the military camp, or even in the backyard of certain noble's daughter, I would always be able to quickly find him, as if I already knew where he was. By the way, wasn't it a bit too early for him to run into a group of women at this time? She's just good at talking. All she has to do is act pitiful and cute, and she'll easily pass. I felt rather helpless. Perhaps this was the reason why Cavendish always had such a good relationship with others despite being so mischievous. Whenever a group of noble daughters walked over, they would always pinch Cavendish's little face and joke around with him, allowing him to take advantage of them. And if it was me, I would definitely respectfully bow to him and then quickly run away. Even though we all have the same face, why is there such a difference in treatment? I also want to act pitiful and take advantage of her. Get along well with the citizens. But reality was cruel. While Cavendish was famous for being a playboy in the royal court, causing trouble and enjoying life, I only had a boring tin can and an even more boring middle-aged minister by my side. Even though I worked hard in all aspects, and my grades were quite good as well, it was precisely because I had an adult's mind that I was unable to act cute that I didn't get along with others. Even now, I still remembered that when I said this, that brat looked at me with pity for quite a while before saying, No, it's just that our future king, Prince Roland, doesn't understand a human heart at all. At that time, I had planned to use the iron fist of elder brother's love to teach him what it meant to be a person's heart. After realizing that I couldn't beat him, I used Big Sis Kelly. Cavendish said that as long as he acted pitiful, he wouldn't be punished. He even said that you were easy to fool, to let Cavendish know what it meant by the sinister hearts of adults. Thus, a certain someone was miserable. The number of classes he missed doubled. Kelly and I were watching over him when he tried to skip classes next month. He didn't succeed even once. But now, I still remember what Cavendish said after that. He only said it once. Roland, your thoughts are like delicate gears that are full of delicate calculations and rules. You count the limits and contributions of human beings as a necessity on paper. Although it is reasonable, it always makes me uncomfortable. As a king, there's really no point in scheming so much. The entire country will be yours in the future. You only need to meet the needs of others when necessary. The basic necessities of life will be met. Slogans and beliefs will give them the motivation to take action. This was the advice of a younger brother to an older brother. Although I listened to it and tried to change, it was difficult to change a person's nature. A few words were unable to change an adult's habits of thought. But this also made me change my opinion of Cavendish. It wasn't that he didn't have a brain. He was just too lazy to use it. With me, his older brother, as the scapegoat, he was happy to become a heartless second prince. Perhaps this kind of role was the most harmonious within the royal family. Ambitious schemers and political investors wouldn't be able to find any loopholes to stir up trouble. Of course, it was difficult to change a person's habits. After not using his brain for a long time, Cavendish was indeed becoming more and more brainless. But sometimes he would have a flash of inspiration at a crucial moment and would always be able to grasp the crux of the matter. Sometimes I would ask for his opinion and mock him for having the instincts of a wild animal. Yet, he would always mysteriously repeat the same sentence. That's because you don't understand the human heart. But I do. Then, I would continue to use all kinds of small tricks to torment him, leaving him with nowhere to use his strength. I would once again understand the viciousness of the human heart. But this time, it seemed that I was the one at a disadvantage. Damn Cavendish, I've been tricked. Was it human nature to satisfy the desires of those who desired it? I felt that this was nothing more than sophistry. However, Cavendish managed to stir up the entire world with this simple scheme and his understanding of the human heart. As the god of evolution, Sophocles desired to evolve, so he gave Sophocles evolution. The god of holy light was only a puppet of the source of order, so Sophocles gave Sophocles a reason to fall into his trap. As for me, Sophocles probably saw through my weakness of not being on guard against the people around me. Perhaps even Eliza wasn't the only candidate. Perhaps Sophocles had treated Renee so well because he had considered this day. Then, he unhesitatingly gave up on Renee only because Eliza had already agreed to cooperate with him. My plans were usually incredibly complicated. I would use the overall situation to slowly lure my opponents into my trap. Even if it was a scheme, it would be an overt scheme. Personal thoughts? That would be meaningless in front of the overall situation. Cavendish's methods were incredibly simple. He would simply make the most important person do the most important thing. Just 2 or 3 actions would be enough to give me a huge headache. Perhaps I've been so passive recently because deep down in my heart, I was still unable to view him as a mortal enemy. In a way, this was a type of hopeless naivety. I also knew that this was a flaw in my personality. However, some things are difficult to fix even if you knew they were wrong. Cavendish had made critical decisions. With someone who understood me so well like Eliza helping me, it was no wonder that I had been so passive recently. And he indeed had a powerful bargaining chip in his hands. Even if I knew what it was, I wouldn't be able to promise her the same thing. What a grand scheme. You sent so many demons to invade the fire elemental plane just to lure me into your trap? We both believe that it's worth it if we can avoid the worst possible outcome. Eliza continued refilling my wine glass. She wasn't afraid to say words of betrayal at all. Perhaps she had long since anticipated that this day would come. My headache kept increasing. I was no idiot. Since they wanted to restrict me, that could only mean one thing. We had miscalculated Cavendish's progress. Now was the most critical moment for opening the door to the fire elemental plane. This wasn't what we had expected at all. Cavendish still needed to collect Chaos Girls to create Cynthia and obtain the power to open the door. He had attacked Amelia in order to give me the misconception that he wasn't ready yet. But just by looking at Eliza's current situation, I knew that he had long since been ready. Such trickery wasn't something Cavendish was used to. In fact, it was quite similar to what I was used to. I now knew who had been scheming against me behind my back. She never appeared in front of me, so I was only worried about her. Why would I be on guard against her? Should I exclaim that Eliza had already surpassed her master? The wine bottle was already empty. Eliza casually shook it and refilled it. She wanted to pour more wine, but this time I took back my empty glass. There's not much time left. I sighed as I stood up and gripped my sword. That's right, there wasn't much time left. Their actions had already given the signal that the fire elemental plane would be more likely to open the door to the fire elemental plane with every minute that passed. I couldn't stay here even if I had a fight with my family. Roland, I'm only doing this for your own good. I know. I'm grateful. I silently unsheathed my Dawn Holy Sword. This was my choice. My sword's edge trembled slightly, revealing the confusion in my heart. Perhaps nobody expected that such a day would come. I would actually draw my sword against the youngest daughter that I had always wanted to protect. Roland, you don't understand the human heart. She spoke calmly as tears flowed down her cheeks. But this time, I was unable to wipe them away for her. Yes, I'm truly sorry. I'm afraid that I'll never understand the human heart for the rest of my life. Chapter 805. Snowflakes kept falling, and the snow swiftly covered the ground. It was as if a naughty child was waving a crayon, and the entire world turned white. I exhaled a white breath as I blankly looked at everything in front of me. The mountains were all white. The moment that I unsheathed my sword, the entire world changed into this. A boundless snowfield extended to the end of the horizon, and a frozen waterfall hung above an icy lake. The distant snow mountain seemed like the background, but it felt so close to me. Eliza? Harloise? A strange sense of space replaced my view of the world. Now that I was the only one left in this world, everything returned to peace. It was so quiet and cold. I wasn't used to such a world that had nothing at all. I took a step forward, and only the sound of my foot stepping into the snow was heard. Is anyone there? My shout was answered with, is anyone there? Echoing in the snowy mountains. I tried to be on guard against such a world, but I was unable to focus. My instincts told me that there was no danger here, that I was the only one here, and that this was a safe haven for me alone. What evil spell is this? I was unable to understand what sort of spell could instantly trap me in such a place. A soul world? No, I didn't sense any source of magic. A teleportation spell? Forcefully teleporting me was basically impossible. Everything was real? That was even more impossible. I had just been in a world of fire with infinite flames, and I was facing the current fire elemental god. It was even more impossible for me to be in such a place. Such a land of ice and snow wasn't suitable for fire elemental creatures. In fact, it was even more suitable for ice mages like me. Only now did I discover that I wasn't holding my familiar lightsaber, but a transparent ice blade instead. This was a crystalline longsword with a blade of 5 inches that surpassed common sense. The streamlined blade had no decorations at all, and its natural curvature had a strange beauty to it. It had no decorations whatsoever, and its transparent blade was as thin as a cicada's wing. It made me wonder if it would shatter into pieces the slightest touch. It was more like a work of art than a weapon. However, the slight chill it gave off reminded me that this ice sword, the magic sword of the Northlands, was definitely a vicious weapon. It didn't have a hilt, and the entire blade was a blade. Unknowingly, the right hand that held the sword was already covered in blood. Before the blood dripped to the ground, it had already turned into red snowflakes. Drops of blood flowed down the blade, and cold air surrounded the blade, attracting everyone's attention. This is an ominous sword. I instinctively knew that this sword longed for life, no matter if it was the enemy's or my own. The price for its existence in this world was the sacrifice of life. Stabbing the sword into the snow, I sat down begrudgingly. I looked at the endless snow and the white clouds in the sky. Bewildered, I lay down in the snow. Looking at this sword, I finally understood. It wasn't some strange spell that had brought me here. I had brought myself here on my own accord. The reason? So I'm just a coward. I've already come to my senses. Can people deceive themselves? I had always thought that it was possible. After all, if you told too many lies, it would naturally become true. But this time, it seemed that I had gone too far. Perhaps even this sword was more honest than I was. It had chosen the most unacceptable method for me: escape. I had originally thought that my magic sword Northlands would require some more time to complete. After all, I had never been able to describe the truest Northlands in my heart. But now, it would seem that the only thing I lacked was a bit of emotion. Despair? Pain? Confusion? Resolution? I couldn't be sure which emotion had helped me complete this sword. After all, the Northlands didn't lack such emotions. But I knew that I definitely wouldn't thank it. Escaping would be meaningless. Delaying the arrival of pain would only make waiting for the arrival of pain a type of torture. What would come would eventually come. Even though my power level had clearly increased along with the completion of my sword, and this magic sword's power far exceeded my expectations, this didn't make me feel happy at all. Since it had just been born, why would it ask me to make a choice? Had it sensed my inner anxiety? Or had it lost control of its power after completing its own? All right then. Knowing the reason was meaningless. That's enough. Let me out. I had never expected that there would be a day when I would have to speak to my own sword. But what made me feel helpless was that my words were meaningless. I said, "That's enough." I resolved myself. Let me out. I was suppressing a mysterious anger. Was it directed at my sword, or at myself for being so useless? Time passed bit by bit, but this boring scenery didn't change at all. My anxiety transformed into a burning flame that burned in my chest. Don't be a busybody. You're just a sword. You're nothing. You're just a part of me. You can't make decisions for me. Open it. What you're doing right now is meaningless. Even though I knew that words would be meaningless, my mysterious anxiety transformed into angry roars that reverberated throughout the snowy mountains. Finally, everything returned to normal. In this world of ice and snow where only I existed, I was doing meaningless things. Finally, the flames of my anxiety were extinguished. Every minute that passed made the countdown to Armageddon move even further. The Armageddon clock ticked. Confusion and fear mixed together. 4 or 5 hours have been wasted just like that. My angry roars transformed into whispers of begging. Please, open it. The next instant, the entire world disappeared. I no longer saw the snowy mountains, but instead my familiar home. Had my magic sword reached its limit? Or was there no turning back now? However, the scene in front of me was slightly abnormal. My maid was currently using a meteor hammer. I meant that she was grabbing my cat's tail and vigorously shaking it. Judging from the cat's pitiful screams, it seemed that I hadn't been gone for long. Roland, save me. Why did you disappear in an instant? Where did you go just now? How long was I gone for? 2 or 3 minutes. Stop wasting time. Hurry and save me. There's ice droplets on your face in the shape of tears. Could it be? That's just your imagination. Do you still want me to save you? I speedily wiped my face as I didn't know what to say anymore. It would seem that this magic sword's power far exceeded my expectations. I was rather afraid, as well as regretful. Finally, my fear transformed into joy. At the very least, I hadn't made an irreversible choice. After several hours alone in this world of ice and snow, my constantly changing emotions helped me to completely calm down. A future with only one path? No. I had always believed that there was no such thing as a hopeless situation in this world. Even in despair, there would still be endless hope. It was just that we didn't grit our teeth and persevere until the moment when things changed for the better. We didn't find that only hope. A world of despair? A scene of despair? It's not like I've never experienced despair before. Facing the Armageddon with a sad expression doesn't suit me to begin with. As long as there's still a sliver of hope. No, even if there's no hope at all, I'll still force my way out. Chapter 806. After I returned from the land of ice and snow, my impulses and emotions finally returned to being rational. That type of plot where the entire world owes you a tragedy, or something like killing a younger sister to prove the Tao, doesn't suit me at all. Even if it's the hell difficulty, I'll always try everything I can to achieve victory. That's always been my style. But sometimes, when my passion faded and reality appeared before me, no matter how much I prepare myself mentally, the cruel reality would still teach me how to be a person. And now, the most merciless reality was right in front of me. I can't beat her. I have no chance of winning at all. That's right. After my passion froze and I analyzed the current situation rationally, the most serious problem appeared. I had no chance of winning at all against the Eliza before me. For me, combat was nothing more than a competition of information and power level. Some preferred overwhelming power, while others preferred to obtain information and use targeted strategies and fighting styles to obtain victory. And I was doubtlessly the latter. Before every battle, I would gather information and prepare targeted strategies and trump cards in order to weaken my opponent and obtain victory. But this time, I had already lost quite a few points in terms of information since I hadn't made any preparations at all. Most of my understanding of Eliza was from 10 years ago, and after she transformed into a demon, she didn't want to talk about her own abilities, so there was no need for me to ask. Plus, Eliza had the basic abilities of a Chaos Girl, a demon main god, and a fire elemental god. It could be said that Eliza's past information was completely outdated. However, it was likely that Eliza would know quite clearly what abilities I had, what I was good at, what bad habits I had, what combat styles I had, and what flaws I couldn't change. The worst part was that I had completely explained my understanding of combat and my abilities to Eliza when I taught her. In that case, not only did she know about my abilities, she also likely knew about my combat choices and habits. This was quite fatal. It could be said that I scored 0 points in terms of information preparation and combat preparation, while Eliza scored full points. But that wasn't even the most fatal part. Honestly, I can't see any chance of winning at all. Previously, I mentioned that Eliza was stronger than any main god I had ever met. That wasn't a meaningless description. The current Eliza was the main god of the fire elemental plane, as well as a survivor of the Chaos Girls. I didn't know exactly how much of the Chaos Girl's memories and power she had obtained, but just her aura alone already surpassed what I previously believed to be the strongest main god, Sophocles. And the most shameless part of all, yes, absolutely shameless, she was the elemental god of this dimension, which meant that she could obtain an endless amount of power through the elemental throne. It would never be possible for her to run out of power, and if she died in battle, she would be able to swiftly revive, unless she was like Immortal Orkin, who directly dug out his elemental throne. But this time, I hadn't made any preparations at all. I didn't even know where the elemental throne was. With Immortal Orkin as an example, the elemental throne would definitely be well hidden. It would be impossible for me to find it immediately. I can't see any possibility of victory. I couldn't see any possibility of victory in terms of mana and magic. As for melee combat, even if I didn't consider Eliza's ridiculously powerful combat techniques, it would still be impossible for me to win in a melee combat against a demon main god and an elemental god. Sweat dripped down my face as the maid in front of me continued to remain silent. However, I was unable to find an opening to attack at all. That little bastard Carwins had set up an impossible situation for me to overcome. Master, please don't act rashly. Otherwise, rather than being destroyed forever, having you return to the Gue Ming River for a few months of vacation might be a better option. Even my undying nature had been seen through. How was I supposed to play? Her silent eyes were filled with a faint killing intent. She had already made up her mind. I hadn't even made up my mind to kill her. She was already prepared for the worst possible outcome. Plus, there was a huge difference in power level and information between us. It was impossible to see any possibility of victory in such a battle. Fighting and killing is so hurtful. How about we play a game of chess and guess a riddle? You let me leave if I win? I tried saying something that even I didn't dare to believe. However, Eliza chuckled. I already knew that you would say that. And then, a three-dimensional chessboard with hundreds of silver and gold chess pieces appeared in front of us. A game of mage chess with 500 chess pieces? It even comes with a map of another world. Every living chess piece can replace a battle group. A super precious item that can simulate a world war at home. I've always wanted to play. Did you really think that I would say that? By the time we finish this game, it'll probably be the end of the world already. From a certain standpoint, my heart was bleeding. The modern version of mage chess would at most have 3 continents with 100 chess pieces. These chess pieces were capable of simulating multiple dimensions, so they would definitely be treasured by some powerful individual. But if we started playing, not to mention 1 or 2 days, it would take several months to simulate a world war. Then how about a riddle? I have the complete set of Hermit Rice's conjectures, 9th Circle Mage selections, and Goblin Engineer level for exam questions. Shall I go first? Eliza miraculously took out a dozen books from her maid's skirt. As expected, maid's skirts were dimensional bags that contained everything. Hermit Rice, a certain deranged mathematician, had left behind so many ancient puzzles that would drive a genius mathematician insane. As for my mathematical knowledge, did I mention that I didn't need to learn advanced mathematics in law school? The only thing I had confidence in about Hermit's conjectures was that I would absolutely not be able to understand the questions. As for the remaining magic and goblin exams, I had heard of both of them before. The former was a necessary exam to become a high-level mage, while the goblins used it to torment foreign engineers who came to study. There were even questions like, what's the goblin's favorite food? How many children can goblins give birth to? Being able to answer these questions didn't depend on one's knowledge or reasoning. Instead, it depended on one's boredom and whether or not one was capable of controlling goblins. And the most important part was that even if I solved these questions, Eliza, can you guarantee that you'll let me go after I solve these questions? Of course, I can't. Nobody could guarantee that the other party would keep their promises, especially since I had never treated keeping promises as a virtue. I would only teach this concept to the person before me. Once again, I experienced the pain of shooting myself in the foot. The smiling maid sealed off all of my escape routes. Even though I clearly had the upper hand in this battle, I instinctively felt that as long as I attacked, I would instantly be the one to be beaten to the ground. Escape? Where would I escape to? This was the fire elemental plane, and my opponent was the master of this plane. How could I possibly escape? My power level was completely suppressed, and my information was exposed. My opponent had the geographical advantage, and she could even summon reinforcements at any time to replenish her mana and revive. The current me had no chance of victory. Idiot, you still need to rely on us at such a critical moment. I paused in surprise at the silly cat's words. Only now did I recall that she seemed to have long since predicted that things would develop to such a state. Could it be that she had long since prepared for this? Us? Who else? The next instant, my doubts were answered. Above the silly cat's head, a seed was swiftly sprouting. It instantly transformed into a rose that was as tall as me. The familiar green-haired beauty then walked out of the rose. At the same instant, An icy, killing intent spread from my feet all the way to my back. At this moment, the smiling maid before me finally had a true killing intent. Chapter 807. While Roland was trapped in the fire elemental plane, the chaos battlefield in the mortal plane was also in chaos. The heavenly gods died one after another, and the angels were as weak as little chicks. The chaotic dimension was gradually smoothed out, and the furious god of holy light gradually found his target. However, the price for this was golden-colored divine blood that covered this entire dimension. Just like in the past, order and chaos fiercely clashed once again. Evolution? That might not be the case. However, the fact that the venerated major figures of the past had died for nothing was quite ironic. Of course, certain existences might think that it was worth it. The chaotic space was like an ocean in a storm. Fatal undercurrents and hidden reefs were everywhere. The chaotic space and cracks were even more fatal than any death trap. In a normal situation, the Order angels and gods would have their own power to gradually repair the distortions and cracks. But right now, what they lacked the most was time. At every moment, there were powerful existences falling on the battlefield. They were the sacrifices of this battle, and they belonged to both sides. The scattered divine souls, divine blood, divine concepts, and divine power of the dead Order gods gradually neutralized this distorted area, paving the way to attack the door in the crystal wall. Was this really a waste? Perhaps not in the eyes of both sides participating in this battle. The ancient bronze dimensional door was devouring all the sacrifices. The two statues of the goddess of life on both sides of the door were slowly opening their eyes. Their lips were slightly open as if they were saying something. The goddess of order on the right was elegant and noble. Her white robe was like a work of art. Her long golden hair glowed brilliantly, and her dark blue eyes flashed with wisdom and compassion. The white wings on her back trembled slightly. She put her hands together and prayed. Her eyes were filled with sorrow, as if she couldn't bear to see the pitiful state of the world. The goddess of chaos on the left was devilishly beautiful. She had short black hair, and her eyes shone with red light. Her red eyes were black, and the whites of her eyes were rather frightening. The two horns on her forehead were cute and mischievous rather than vicious. Unlike her older sister with two wings, Cynthia only had one demon wing on her left. She wasn't wearing female clothing either. Instead, she wore bright red armor. Her classic armor only protected her vitals. She held a red spear and eagerly entered the battlefield. Her valiant posture made her seem more like a goddess of war than a demon lord. At this moment, Cynthia had a smile on her lips as she looked at everything before her in delight. She seemed to be satisfied with the abundant offerings, or perhaps she was even more satisfied with the battles that pleased her. This was probably the first time that the Gemini goddesses had ever appeared in front of a younger generation. Yet they were astonishingly similar to their creations. However, he probably wasn't in the mood to admire the goddess of holy light's appearance. Carwins, who would usually go into battle lightly, was now wearing heavy armor for once. He was armed to the teeth. After all, he was about to face the publicly acknowledged strongest existence in this world, the god of holy light. Even though the god of holy light had been weakened multiple times, and even though he had lost multiple clones, the weakened god of holy light was still the strongest main god in the mortal plane. The god of holy light had thousands of years of faith in the holy light, and billions of devout believers had given him the power of faith. The god of holy light, who had no sense of self, was still publicly recognized as the strongest in the mortal plane. The slowly rising sun caused Cavendish to end his hibernation and prepare to face the Holy Light faction's attack. Not only did he not hesitate or worry when facing a powerful enemy that was theoretically impossible to defeat, he even had an expression of excitement. It was as if he had been waiting for this day for a long time. I'll say this first. Roland is mine. I'm going to test out the power level of the previous generation's Chaos Child. Donati's didn't receive a response to his words. However, the existences standing next to him were naturally at the peak of the world as well. Demons, devils, undead, dragons, humans, dark cultists, and fanatical believers. This was probably the most diverse group in the world. Their leaders' excitement doubtlessly boosted their fighting spirits. However, not everyone was in high spirits as they welcomed the end of their plan. Donati's, who longed for battle, was currently rather listless as he coldly watched everything unfold before him. He would occasionally glance at Cavendish with a complex expression. However, he was still heavily injured, so he probably didn't have any other choice. The ghost that stole the god of holy light's heat and life stood by herself in front of the door. She seemed to be studying the carvings on the door and had no intention of participating in the battle. For her, taking revenge on Roland was her only goal. But judging from how her eyes kept flashing with confusion and contemplation, even she wasn't able to convince herself with this reason. Meanwhile, the other undead emperor seemed to have been injured by the god of holy light's holy light and was currently doing his best to erase all traces of his existence. Shupness, who had entered the mortal plane with great ambitions, was currently squatting in a corner with a depressed expression. He probably regretted coming to this world. Although he had survived the previous battle, he probably wouldn't have stayed here if he had any other choice. The demons, high-level undead, and devils who had survived the previous battle were all the same. Since they were unable to leave this dimension, and the holy light gods and angels attacked, their species and identities determined that they had to fight for their survival. Since the Chaos faction and Order faction were about to start their final battle, the other residents of the mortal plane naturally wouldn't sit still and watch the situation worsen. Archmages and Drool weren't useless. They had their own understanding of the world. Even though the arrogant Holy Light faction remained silent, the fact that the dimensional door was opening rapidly spread throughout the mortal plane. Numerous floating airships, flying magical beasts, and dragons silently flew into the sky. They followed the path that the Holy Light faction had opened up and entered the battlefield. The passengers on these airships were quite diverse. There were humans, elves, beastmen, dragons, undead, mages, gnomes, and even gods from other divine factions. Some sent their clones, incarnations, or personally participated. Since the end of the world was about to arrive, nobody would be able to quietly wait at home for everything to happen, even if they were an undying god. Although the Nature faction didn't have any god kings, their strangely shaped nature divine beasts were already carrying more than a dozen high-level gods. Even though they had lost contact with Roland, the Hell Dragons still started moving. The gigantic bone airship between them was a super monstrous airship that was covered in the aura of death and hell. It also had the aura of a god. The gods and beasts in the ocean finally left their holy lands. They were being carried by gigantic magical whales and seashells as they slowly moved forward. The Cloud Castle was also moving slowly. Its main power source had been almost completely destroyed in the previous battle, but it still appeared on the front lines. It was just that it seemed rather awkward to be dragged along by the dragons and beasts. Elemental creatures also appeared in the sky. The Wind Elemental Lords and Earth Elemental Lords, who would normally fight each other whenever they saw each other, were actually able to peacefully coexist on the same airship. They were definitely not the only exceptions. Amidst this abnormal calm, amidst the pressure of the end of the world, the undead and angels were also able to travel together. Holy Light priests were able to peacefully chat with undead mages. The Wood Spirits also sent out their aerial fleet. Although the 7 virtues were all present, their Mother Empress wasn't present. Strictly speaking, Amelia was also currently fighting for the sake of the mortal plane. It was just that the situation was slightly different. Oh my, isn't this the nutritious little brat who still hasn't graduated from her Oedipus romance? Just give up. Look at that cat, look at me. Don't you know what Roland likes? Even if you're not his daughter, it's still impossible. I was now rendered completely speechless. Sister, are you really here to help me and not to make things difficult for me? Why are you taunting me right from the start? Don't even compare your breasts. Eliza is about to go berserk. Also, silly cat, stop showing off your adult body at such a time. Chapter 808. Roland, there's not much time left. The door is opening. My system, which had been becoming ever more silent recently, was urging me on. Ever since Cavendish's scheme was exposed, she had become ever more silent. Could it be that she was feeling guilty and doubting her actions from back then? But with my understanding of her, that shouldn't be the case. Can you stop him? No matter what, he should only have the same level of authority as Cynthia. If I was in my complete form, I could directly close the door. But right now, I'm nothing more than a lonely ghost that has lost my foundation. I'll try to stall for time, but don't have too much hope. After saying this, my system fell silent once more. But in the distant chaotic space, the goddess of order's opened eyes were slowly closing, and her arms were also closing. This caused the door to faintly lose its glow. The door's progress was delayed, but right after that, Cynthia's goddess of order statue glowed brightly with red light as energy flowed out and forcefully made up for what was missing. However, a faint humanoid figure could be seen on the statue's forehead, and it seemed to be howling in pain. It's actually possible to interfere. At the same time, Eliza was eavesdropping on my conversation. She looked at me with an even more hostile expression when she heard this. She finally lost her patience against the unrepentant Roland, as well as Amelia and Harlois who kept provoking her. Asterisk boom. Asterisk the next instant. A fist met a palm, and two pairs of beautiful eyes glared angrily at each other. Eliza and Amelia were already fighting, but the strange thing was that neither of them had any intention of using any spells. Even though their energy levels were off the charts, they chose to directly engage in melee combat, which seemed like it didn't require any technique at all. The two beauties fought, but it didn't seem like entertainment at all. In fact, it was the opposite. Even the slightest contact would make one feel like they were either dead or injured. Eliza transformed her arms into claws as she started attacking relentlessly like a tidal wave. She seemed as fierce as a dragon, completely attacking without any defense. But actually, she was only attacking 30% and defending 40%, with 30% left to spare. However, she was constantly observing her opponent's weaknesses. The moment she discovered that her opponent revealed an opening, she would use her signature interlocking technique to deal a fatal blow to her opponent. Doesn't this look familiar? Perhaps in terms of individual strength, she had already surpassed her teacher, but her fighting style and philosophy were still inextricably linked to Roland. On the other side, Amelia's fighting technique was more simple and violent. Straight punches, heavy punches, hooks, simple punches, yet not even the sound of the wind could be heard. However, no one would doubt the terrifying power that came with those slender hands. Wherever her fists and feet passed, light would be distorted and space would faintly tremble. It was as if her brute force was enough to shatter the rules of space and tear a crack in space. Unlike normal combat, both Eliza and Amelia were dual cultivators of magic and martial arts. Neither of them used blades, and their melee combat techniques were all self-taught combat techniques that they had developed from basic mage self-defense spells. However, it was likely that even the strongest grandmaster of combat in the mortal plane would be instantly defeated by them. The reason? It was pure, overwhelming power. Eliza and Amelia used magic to strengthen their physical bodies, obtaining inconceivable speed and strength bonuses. No matter how excellent one's technique was, if one's reaction speed couldn't keep up, or if one's strength couldn't keep up, one would still be forcefully crushed. Fighting techniques and sword techniques were fundamentally still techniques for using one's own physical body and weapon. If one sacrificed their life to use an ultimate technique, yet still couldn't compare to the opponent reflexively reaching out with a finger, no matter how skilled one's technique was, it would be impossible to make up for the foundational difference between the two individuals. Even in melee combat, Eliza and Amelia were still fighting at the main god level, just like how the Titan had defeated Donati's in the past. As long as one's pure power was ridiculous enough, there would be no need for any tricks or demonic tricks. In front of a physical collision at the level of a star, all those colorful magical techniques would probably be nothing more than fireworks. It would seem that Eliza isn't as self-aware as she claims to be. I fell into deep thought as I watched the battle before me. It was quite normal for Amelia to choose melee combat. She was of the wood element, so it would be foolish of her to fight against Eliza, who was of the fire element, using magic. This was especially so since Eliza's physical strength originated from the earth, which was her strongest aspect to begin with. However, although Eliza's mage combat techniques were also quite good, they definitely weren't her strongest aspect. Her strongest aspect was probably the tremendous amount of magic that came from her dual identities as the Chaos Abyss and the Fire Elemental Goddess. She would use the same method to fight against Eliza, relying on the environment around her. Even if it was melee combat, Eliza's true body would likely be the same size as the other main gods. A gigantic body would be able to obtain greater strength and weight. Using her true body in melee combat would definitely be far more powerful than using a smaller body. No matter how much the dwarves honed their fighting techniques, they would still be no match for a young Titan in melee combat. I looked around at the familiar streets, familiar houses, and familiar home. Not only were these things binding me, it would seem that even Eliza herself didn't care about these things binding her. At the very least, at this stage, these things were restricting her choices. Perhaps she had already resolved herself to destroy everything she treasured in the past in her battle against me. However, she would be unable to accept the price of losing her home against the outsider Amelia that she hated. Meanwhile, Amelia was far more sly. First, she provoked me verbally, then she started melee combat. Then, she intentionally affected the environment with her attacks. It was evident that she had already seen through everything. How despicable. But I like it. Although I apologize, since you've already revealed an opening, I will naturally take advantage of this victory to attack. Of course, the restraining effect of home was limited. If this dragged on for too long, there would naturally come a time when Elisa would give up on everything. But judging from this, she would never be able to completely forget her emotions. In that case, what I needed to do was quite simple. Cavendish, that brat, truly understands people's hearts. The only reason why Eliza would do all this is because of her love for me. Fine then, silly cat, stop glaring at me. Love counts as well. In that case, can she really abandon everything else, including her friendships with others? I unhesitatingly took out a magical firework and tossed it into the sky. Originally, I really didn't intend to use this ambush, but perhaps at this time, if the goal was to stall Eliza so that I could leave, their appearance would be more useful than mine. I originally thought that it would take at least half an hour for them to arrive in this dimension after receiving the notification. I didn't expect that they would instantly respond. You brat. You finally asked for reinforcements. I thought that it would take you a long time. The red dragon suddenly descended. Judging from her expression, as if she was watching a show, she had been waiting for quite a while already. You're so stubborn that you're going to suffer. Marguerite was quite calm. It seemed that she had long since known that the situation would develop to such a state. Since they were here, Adam was naturally here as well. But this guy, the power of fire in his body is too unstable. It's quite easy for Eliza to discover it, so we had him sleep. There was also a block of ice on the red dragon's back. The red-haired man was currently glaring angrily at me. Although what Marguerite said made a lot of sense, why did I feel like this guy couldn't bear to watch any longer and was about to jump out, only to be ambushed from behind? I had originally wanted them to be my backup to save Eliza, but why did it seem that they had arrived first? I was still astonished at why they were already prepared, but the silly cat's expression and Marguerite's next words caused me to fall silent to the point where I didn't know how to respond. Don't blame Harlois and us for hiding things from you. Since we knew that the situation would develop to such a state, how could we possibly let you face it by yourself? You usually seem quite rational, but when it comes to such things, it's quite easy for you to be impulsive and fail. You'll always choose the path of self-torture. Although I don't know how you managed to calm down, if things had continued to develop like before, you definitely wouldn't have had a tragic ending. Marguerite's explanation sounded quite reasonable. However, I only felt incredibly embarrassed. In that case, My previous resolution and sadness were nothing more than a show I put on in front of my old friends? No, no matter if it's you killing Eliza and regretting it for the rest of your life, or if Eliza kills you, the two of you will end up becoming enemies. That's not something we want to see. That's why we've interfered. Don't blame us for being meddlesome. Didn't you all interfere with Adam's resolution a few years ago? Little Red also had a rare, serious expression. I finally saw through everything. So they had long since guessed. No, confirmed what Eliza would do and made preparations for it. Only I, who was closely involved in the situation, didn't see everything clearly. Imperceptibly, Eliza and Amelia stopped fighting. Eliza had a complex expression as she glanced at Marguerite, Little Red, and Adam. Finally, her complex emotions transformed into a sigh. Must you all stop me? Do you know what will happen if I don't stop Roland? It'll be nothing more than Roland dying. We're all used to it. It doesn't matter. He's already died more than once. We're all used to things like self-destruction. He's just like a cockroach. Even though these guys were clearly on my side, their words made me so angry that I was grinding my teeth. It's different this time. He shares the same soul as Cavendish. Eliza questioned angrily, but the people in front of her just smiled at her. Didn't they know? The answer was obviously no. But just like how Roland and Marguerite were unable to change Adam's resolve, they were unable to change Roland's resolve as well. Perhaps it should be said that it wasn't that they were unable to change it, but rather that they couldn't bear to change it. They weren't saying beautiful things like saving the world was more important than personal benefits. It was just that they knew that Roland would never be able to tolerate hiding and not facing everything. He would have to suffer and regret for a long period of time in the future. Compared to the true hell of the river Styx, living in a living hell of regret was far worse. Eliza fell silent. She understood the resolve of her old friends and seniors. However, all she wanted was for the man she loved to survive, even if he would be filled with endless years of regret and pain, even if Roland hated her for the rest of his life. In the end, her silence transformed into an offensive stance. Amidst the eruption of a sea of lava, my old residence was instantly reduced to rubble. Eliza, who hadn't said a single word, expressed her choice. Adam, who had finally been unfrozen, furrowed his eyebrows as he faced her. As Marguerite smiled in a strange manner, spatial magic flashed continuously, and I was forcefully teleported a certain distance away. All that was left behind was a sentence that I couldn't understand. We'll help you stall her for a while. In a cave 30 kilometers to the left, there's a teleportation portal that leads to the northernmost continent. When you get there, head in the direction of home, and you'll obtain what you want the most. Chapter 809. So, from the very start, I was the only one who didn't know anything. Perhaps even Adam and Marguerite saw things more clearly than I did. But there was one question. How did they learn the key to defeating Cavendish, as well as the secret of my undying nature? Eliza knew all this because Cavendish told her. But how did Adam and the others know? Actually, I knew the answer just by thinking about it. That was because there weren't many people in this world who knew about this. Silly cat. You should be thanking me, not questioning me. According to your logic, as long as the result is good, the process doesn't matter. What do you think would have happened if I hadn't made all these arrangements? What would have happened? Would I have spent so much effort to kill Eliza? Or would Eliza viciously kill me so that I could return to the river Styx to continue channeling? No matter what the result was, I wouldn't be able to accept it. So Harlois, thank you so much for this. Yep, this was indeed the best result. I sincerely thanked Harlois. Asterisk plop. Asterisk, however, the black cat fell off my head. She looked at me with an expression of astonishment and disbelief, as if she had seen a ghost. You're Cavendish in disguise, aren't you? Roland, that cold-blooded, twisted, neurotic, masochistic, overthinking, selfish father, maidservant, and Sundara Roland actually thanked someone? My eyebrows were no longer furrowed, but rather twisted. What was going on? Was this how the silly cat viewed me? Cough. At any rate, I'm really thankful to all of you. Even if I'm cold-blooded, crazy, masochistic, arrogant, servant-loving, and cat abuser, I know what's good for me. As for what you just said, I don't hold a grudge against you at all. Yep, not at all. Aren't you just cold-blooded, crazy, masochistic, arrogant, servant-loving, and cat abuser? Relax, I've already forgotten about it. Don't you remember it clearly? Wait a moment. Why is there a cat abuser? What do you intend to do to me? The silly cat's screams echoed in my ears as I let go of the elemental lord's corpse that resembled a dead lizard king. Behind us, a sea of flames was chasing after us. Eliza was stopped by Adam, but countless fire creatures and elemental lords were summoned by the earth elemental god. They were willing to sacrifice their lives in order to stop me. The Northlands. He held the ice-cold longsword in his right hand, charged, dashed forward, drew the sword, and sheathed it. In front of the ice magic blade, the sturdy body that the magma giant was so proud of was easily sliced apart like butter being cut by a table knife. It was easily sliced apart, melted, and turned into pieces and remains. A domain of ice and snow covered everything around me. Although my Northland's magic sword hadn't activated its incredibly abnormal and powerful special effects, just the fact that it was a pure semi-god ice magic sword meant that it was destined to be the natural enemy of all fire elemental creatures. From a certain standpoint, I wasn't used to using this longsword. Although strictly according to HE standards, this single-edged sword could also be considered a sword. A longsword of this length definitely wouldn't be suitable for infantry to use normally. Although an overly long sword would look cool, it would easily knock into unnecessary objects, making it incredibly inconvenient to use. If I tried to draw my sword, only to discover that the tip of my sword was stuck into the ground, and I couldn't pull it out even after a long time, I would be laughed at by my opponent. This was just an analogy, not a personal experience. Since the sword was too long and couldn't be pulled out from the ground, it would be far too stupid. It definitely wasn't something that I could do. Although it was quite fun to slash at large magma giants, fire dragons, and other large magical creatures, the overly long sword would actually become a hindrance if the enemy got too close to me. It just so happened that small and medium-sized enemies were the norm. I was getting a headache now. I had never practiced using a super long sword before. If I had half a month to practice, I would probably be able to use it quite well. But right now, the most precious thing was probably time. But now that I was facing a Fire Lord, I needed this magic sword's power of ice and snow. It would be nice if it could be shorter. What astonished me was that the instant this thought appeared in my mind, the magic sword suddenly shrunk. I kicked away a fire dwarf that approached me and pondered as I looked at the short sword in my hand. It would seem that this magic sword is even more useful than I expected, with even more potential to be unearthed. However, I'll probably need a lot of practice before I can get used to it. I smiled as I looked at the endless number of high-level fire creatures in front of me. Aren't there so many live targets for me to practice on? Shoot it down, divine spear. My sword suddenly lengthened, and I instantly skewered two fire elementals that were 30 meters away. As they returned to their elemental source, I suddenly clasped my hands together and swung my sword with all my might. My super long sword directly swept through all the fire elementals around me. How interesting. What should I do next? Scatter. Simbinzakura? Sit in a frozen sky. Ice will Maru? Forget it. This seems rather difficult. I still need to learn more about it. So let's go with the simplest one. The red-faced monster in front of me actually dares to block me. What demon is it? Take this. I could sense that the intense battle behind me was constantly moving. Eliza was probably leading the battle forward. But judging from how Adam and the others were still brimming with mana, they should still be able to hold on. Meanwhile, my enemies weren't that strong. As I slaughtered them, the earth elemental lords and magical creatures that I had temporarily gathered also swiftly returned to the mortal plane. When I saw the one-time used dimensional door hidden in the cave, I hesitated. Marguerite had said that this was a dimensional door that led to the northernmost continent. If I entered it, who knew how long it would take to travel from the northernmost continent to Barty? It was likely that it would take at least half a year. Such a waste of time would be worse than if Eliza kept me here. if they were using another method to restrict me. Aren't you tired of thinking so much? I'm tired. There's no helping it. Let's just say that I was born cold-blooded, awkward, neurotic, self-masochistic, overthinking things, having a penchant for maids, being a tsundere, and abusing cats. That's my nature, and it's impossible to change. You still remember? I've never seen a man as petty as you. Oomph. That's because you've never met Rollo and Baron Blackhand. Don't try to fool me. I know that they're all your alternate identities. You're so petty. While chatting with the silly cat, I also finished the final preparations for the dimensional teleportation. There's no other way. Let's just treat the silly cat as a living cat. Although I said that, I still felt that this time, Adam and Marguerite wouldn't make things difficult for me, just like in the past. You're always so mysteriously confident in the people around you. You were just tricked just now. Can't you learn from that? I can't help it. That's just my nature. I can't change it. My words echoed in the cave. When everything returned to normal, there was no one left in the cave. 5 minutes later, the furious fire elemental god turned the cave and the volcano into ashes. Chapter 8:10. Sometimes there was only a thin line between a volcano and an iceberg. Just a moment ago, it was so hot that I needed to bring my own air conditioner, but now it was so cold that I needed a stove. After casually slaying the great snow demons blocking my way, my path was now unobstructed. After a long and arduous trek, half an hour, I finally climbed to the top of this ancient snowy mountain that was rarely visited by humans. I had become the first conqueror of this ancient mountain range. Right now, I felt like something was wrong with this scene. Was this supposed to be an extreme adventure? I stood at the top of the snowy mountain as the morning sun slowly rose. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry as I gazed at the endless snowy plains around me, as well as the restless predators that were hiding in ambush. Even if I didn't use any GPS devices, just the frigid temperature alone was enough to make this the northernmost part of the continent a forbidden zone for life. Not only that, this freezing region was the northernmost part of the HE continent, which was very close to the North Pole. Under normal circumstances, if I wanted to go to Bardi right now and immediately turn back, even if I swam across the frigid Borealis Sea, I would only be able to return to the Northlands, which would take me more than half a year. We'll help you stall her for a while. There's a teleportation portal that leads to the northernmost part of the continent in a cave about 30 kilometers to the left. Once you get there, head in the direction of home, and you'll obtain what you want the most. I didn't believe that Marguerite's vague instructions were meaningless. There were far too many mysteries in this world, and far too many mysteries couldn't be explained with words. Riddles were Mage's favorite because there were far too many unspeakable and inexplicable mysteries. It wasn't just to show off one's knowledge and wisdom, nor was it to trick others into paying money. Fine then, I was just saying that. At the very least, I always felt that those scammers and fortune tellers had a habit of opening their mouths and not speaking the human language. This wasn't just a way of scamming people for money. It was more like a sick habit. The direction of home. According to the explanation on paper, my roots were in the Northlands, so of course my home was in the Northlands. Did that mean that I had to go south? But that was the normal route. I definitely wouldn't be able to go back the way I came. Could there be some other secret to this? Could it be that you have to go north? After all, the Northlands is the northernmost part of the world. The direction of home refers to the direction of your home in the entire world. This explanation was rather far-fetched, but Harlow's confident tone gave me some confidence. Silly cat, do you know something? Meow. Are you talking to cat? All right. It was obvious that he was pretending to be confused. Was a secret that he couldn't reveal? In that case, heading north was the correct choice. Was it the extreme north of the extreme north? What would be there? Since I had already determined the direction, I unhesitatingly spread my wings, bounced off the ground, and flew. I didn't fly. The result of blowing air into ice was that my wings instantly turned into ice cubes. And these two ice cubes wouldn't be able to fly. How did I jump up, and how did I land? Fortunately, there was no audience, or it would be really embarrassing. They can't fly high even if they have wings. Polar penguins? So stupid. All right then, I had forgotten that this silly cat would never forget to seize every opportunity to undermine me. But now, I needed to have the silly cat help me summon fire to melt this ice. Just as I prepared to fly into the air, Harloise transformed into her human form and seemed to have no intention of following me. Huh, you should go. That's a one-way street. Who told me to be nosy and ask about it? Now it's pointless for me to follow him. Is it a one-person teleportation portal? Or is it a teleportation portal that's impossible to enter after knowing about it? Meow. Are you asking Meow? I felt rather helpless as I watched Harloise transform back into her cat form and play dumb. But from a certain standpoint, this was an affirmative answer. Although I didn't know Harloise's reason, since she decided to stay, I also made my decision. I floated in midair and took one last glance before unhesitatingly spreading my wings and flying forward. Half an hour later, Harloise was still waiting here until the dimensional crack opened up again. The world of ice was melted by the high temperature, and the incarnation of fire transformed into a second sun. Harloise smiled as if she knew this would happen as she watched the incarnation of the fire god in the sky. Even they were only able to stop you for such a long time? Or is it that your main body is still being stopped, and only your incarnation is coming? The flames reformed into a human form. The beautiful fire god was now so angry that her veins were bulging. Judging from the fact that her incarnation of fire was still unable to take form, this was obviously only an incarnation. Fire god-level existences would be impossible to kill unless they used their main body or entered other dimensions. And since they spent most of their time in the mortal plane using incarnations and clones, projecting an incarnation was already second nature to them. Using divine power to reverse engineer the target of a single-use spell formation and projecting an incarnation along the coordinates would only require time and divine power. However, one shouldn't underestimate the power of this incarnation. During the Holy War, the limit on incarnation's power had been lifted. As long as enough divine power was used, it was possible for an incarnation to be even stronger than the main body. And right now, Eliza was already inconceivably powerful. The incarnation that she had spared no effort in creating would definitely not be something that ordinary people could deal with. Her mere existence was changing the world. The ice and snow were forcefully melted, and the ice elemental spirits were expelled. Fire domains and lava appeared in places where they shouldn't appear. While the ice and snow were expelled by the flames, the entire world was being rewritten. Book racks appeared here one after another. The ice-cold, snowy ground was instantly covered in luxurious purple crystal floorboards. The glorious library replaced the land of ice and snow. Harloise, who wore gold-rimmed spectacles and held a purple scepter, appeared in this sea of books while clutching a thick magical book. Now then, little Eliza, allow me to play with you for a bit. This sentence completely ignited the entire battlefield. The human incarnation of fire was completely incinerated, transforming the entire world into a fiery hell. When fire magic exploded in the far north, I finally arrived at HE's North Pole. The endless ice plains created the borders of the world. One step forward would be nothing but the void. I faintly sensed that this was perhaps an even more suitable dimensional door than Barty. This is the end of the world. There's no path forward. But in order to commend those who see this monument for their fearlessness and sacrifice, as well as for those who are fearless and don't take the boring path of turning back, you can all engrave your name and destination on this monument. You can engrave your name and destination on the monument, and I will use my supreme authority to send you there immediately. Looking at the names Adam and Marguerite at the end, I finally understood why they wanted me to come here, but didn't say why. The moment I saw this gigantic monument, I instinctively reminded myself. This was an unexpected surprise, an Easter egg that the Mother Goddess had left behind for her children. After I left this place, I couldn't tell anyone the truth about this place. I could invite them to explore this place as well, but I couldn't tell them just what kind of surprise was hidden here. It would be impossible for anyone to see this monument unless they reached this final step. If I told them the truth through some other method, then as an unromantic cheater, I would lose the right to receive a surprise gift. As for me, I counted as a newcomer who received an invitation from the previous adventurer. Mother, this is a mark left behind by Mother. My system's screams filled my mind. This was the first time I had ever seen her lose her composure like this. When her screams turned into sobs, I didn't even know how to comfort her. But the current situation proved a certain fact. Since my system doesn't know about this place, then it's impossible for Cynthia to know either. And if Cynthia doesn't know, then Cavendish and Eliza also wouldn't know about this place. Time is precious. I should have directly said something like, go to the Bardi Chaos Dimension. But this was a GM authority on the level of the creator goddesses of order and chaos. This was a rare opportunity, and I felt like it would be a waste to use it just like that. Perhaps I can reconsider my destination. Perhaps I can play some tricks if it's just the choice of destination. This was probably a divine art that could be triggered by certain conditions. In that case, what I wish for would be incredibly important. Just saying a definite destination definitely wouldn't be a mistake. But it seemed that I had an even better choice, and when the area behind me erupted with magical power that engulfed the entire world like a volcanic eruption, I knew that I didn't have much time left. Taking a deep breath, I told him my destination. Whether I lived or died, it was all up to me to take a gamble. I, Roland Mist, wish to go to a destination, the place that Cavendish doesn't want me to go to the most.